The ocean holds secrets that have baffled and haunted us for centuries. From ghost ships found adrift with no crew to vessels disappearing without a trace, these mysteries are as chilling as they are real. We'll uncover cases where science and logic fall short, and the unknown takes over. Prepare to dive into stories of vanished crews, eerie signals from lost ships, and unexplained disasters that remain unsolved to this day. As we explore each unsettling tale, you'll realise the ocean's depths hide more than just water. They hold whispers of lives forever lost, and secrets we may never fully understand. Join us as we set sail into the darkness of the sea's most disturbing mysteries. The silent ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste set sail from New York Harbour on November 7, 1872, under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs. She was a sturdy brigantine, well known in the merchant trade for her reliability. Aboard were Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their young daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors. Their cargo was 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, destined for Genoa, Italy. From the start, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but what happened next would become one of the most haunting mysteries in maritime history. Days after leaving port, the Mary Celeste was spotted by the Canadian brig DEI Greater, some 400 miles east of the Azores. What the crew of the DEI Greater found defied explanation. The Mary Celeste was drifting, sails partially set, but eerily silent and completely abandoned. No one was aboard, not a single soul. The lifeboat was missing, but the ship was otherwise intact, its cargo mostly untouched. Food and water supplies remained on board, and the ship's log showed nothing unusual in the hours leading to the disappearance. What puzzled the boarding party further was the condition of the ship's galley and dining area. A meal was found, partially prepared, as if the crew had abruptly stopped their routine. Some personal items were left on tables and bunks, and a child's toy belonging to Sophia Briggs was discovered near the captain's quarters. The ship's clocks had stopped at different times, adding confusion about the exact moment things went wrong. Even stranger, the ship's pumps showed signs of recent use, but the bilge was unusually dry, suggesting a frantic effort to manage water, or perhaps something more troubling beneath the surface. Captain Morehouse of the DEI Greater sent a boarding party onto the Mary Celeste. What they discovered deepened the mystery rather than solved it. The ship's papers were mostly in order, though the last entry in the log was dated 10 days before the ship was found. Belongings were scattered but left behind, as if the crew had planned to return. Personal effects, clothing and valuables remained. The ship's chronometer was damaged, and the main hatch was partly open, which suggested some hurried activity below deck. But there was no sign of a struggle or violence. No bodies were found, no signs of foul play. Theories quickly circulated in the media and among sailors, but none could explain why everyone vanished without a trace. The strange silence of the Mary Celeste gripped the public imagination. Some suggested piracy, but the cargo was intact and the valuables untouched. Others thought a violent storm or waterspout had forced the crew to abandon ship, but the weather records from the region showed calm seas during that time. The ship itself showed no damage consistent with a natural disaster. Over the years, many explanations have been proposed. One popular idea involved alcohol fumes from the cargo barrels leaking into the ship's hold, creating a toxic environment. Some believed the crew might have feared an explosion and fled in panic, hoping to wait safely in the lifeboat. But if that were true, what happened afterward? The lifeboat was never found, and no survivors ever reported what occurred after abandoning the Mary Celeste. Another theory suggested that the ship had encountered a seaquake or underwater disturbance that created terrifying noises and movements below deck, prompting the crew to leave. Yet this idea did not account for the lack of any damage or clear evidence of such an event. More recent investigations pointed to the possibility of an innocent but fatal navigational error or accident that left the crew stranded or lost at sea. The family of Captain Briggs added a human layer to the mystery. Benjamin Briggs was an experienced and cautious man, known for his dedication to his ship and crew. His wife Sarah and their daughter Sophia were both aboard, and their sudden disappearance added heartbreak to the story. Weeks passed with no news, and families of the missing lived in despair. The fate of the Mary Celeste's people was never resolved. In 1884, the Mary Celeste was salvaged and returned to service, but she never lost her reputation as a ghost ship. Sailors whispered about her in ports, calling her cursed or doomed. She changed owners several times and continued to sail, but every voyage was shadowed by the unanswered questions surrounding her crew's disappearance. Finally, the Mary Celeste met her own mysterious end in 1885. While sailing near the coast of the Azores, she was found leaking badly, her pumps overwhelmed. The crew abandoned her to the sea, and the ship was lost forever to the ocean's depths. Even in her demise, the Mary Celeste remained a vessel wrapped in uncertainty. What happened to Captain Briggs, his family and the crew? Were they victims of an unseen threat, or did fear and misfortune push them into a desperate decision? The silence of the Mary Celeste echoes across history, a reminder that the sea holds secrets no one can fully unravel. Today, her story continues to inspire books, films, and countless theories, but the truth remains as elusive as the drifting ship itself. The strange case of the Mary Celeste has become a symbol of the ocean's power to confound and terrify. Even with modern technology, no definitive answers have emerged. The vastness of the sea swallows secrets, and the Mary Celeste's mystery remains one of the most haunting reminders of how little we truly understand the deep. Some experts believe new clues could still be found in old records or artifacts, but others accept that the mystery may never be solved. The ship's ghostly image lingers in maritime folklore, embodying fear, loss, and the unknown. The Mary Celeste is not just a story about a missing crew, it is a chilling testament to the unpredictable and sometimes cruel nature of life at sea. As night falls over the ocean, and the waves quietly lap against the hulls of countless ships, the question of what happened aboard the Mary Celeste still lingers. Was it an accident, a sudden threat, or something far stranger? The sea has kept its silence for more than a century, and perhaps it always will. The vanishing of the USS Cyclops. The USS Cyclops left the port of Barbados on March 4, 1918, carrying 306 men and a full load of manganese ore. It was a massive Navy collier, built to supply coal to the fleet, and one of the largest ships of its kind at the time. Captain George W. Worley was in command, an experienced officer who had never lost a ship or crew. The journey to Baltimore, Maryland, where the cargo was destined, seemed routine. But the Cyclops never arrived. No distress signals were sent, and the massive ship vanished somewhere in the vast Atlantic Ocean without a trace. Days passed, and when the Cyclops failed to show up, the Navy launched a search operation. Ships scoured the expected route, from the Caribbean to the eastern coast of the United States, but the sea held no sign of the missing vessel, no debris, no lifeboats, no bodies. It was as if the ship had simply disappeared into thin air. The Cyclops remains the single largest loss of life in US Navy history, not directly caused by combat. The mystery of what happened to her has baffled historians, sailors, and investigators for more than a century. A range of theories have surfaced trying to make sense of the disappearance. Some believed a German U-boat had torpedoed the ship, but no record of an attack was confirmed, and no wreckage typical of a submarine strike was ever found. Others suggested structural failure, as the Cyclops was heavily laden with ore, possibly stressing her hull beyond limits. The manganese ore, dense and heavy, could have shifted during rough seas, destabilizing the ship and causing her to capsize suddenly. But no wreckage has ever been located to support this theory either. Captain Worley had reported no problems before leaving Barbados. Interestingly, some crew members reportedly expressed unease before the voyage, mentioning unusual noises from the ship's engines and odd vibrations that couldn't be explained. These small but strange signs went unreported officially, adding a layer of mystery about what might have been happening on board before the disappearance. Weather records from that period suggest the sea was calm without storms severe enough to sink a ship of that size. Yet, the ocean is unpredictable, and hidden dangers may lurk beneath the surface. Some accounts mention sightings of unusual waves or currents near the Bermuda Triangle, the area where the Cyclops is believed to have vanished. This association has fed into the ship's legend as part of the Bermuda Triangle's enduring mystery. The crew included some of the Navy's most skilled men, trained for difficult voyages. Their disappearance without any hint of struggle or emergency is all the more perplexing. No SOS signals were recorded, and no survivors ever came forward to tell the tale. Families of the missing waited for news that never came, facing the unbearable uncertainty of loss with no answers. The Navy's investigations yielded little beyond speculation. leaving an enduring void in maritime history. Beyond the accepted explanations, some rumours took a darker, more unsettling turn. Rumours circulated about sabotage or mutiny, though there was no concrete evidence to back such claims. Others suggested paranormal explanations, with tales of ghost ships and mysterious forces at sea. While these ideas capture the imagination, the facts remain scarce and elusive, locked deep beneath the ocean waves. The disappearance of the Cyclops has inspired searches by divers and oceanographers in modern times, equipped with technology unimaginable in 1918. Sonar scans, deep-sea explorations, and underwater robots have combed large swaths of the Atlantic seabed, but the Cyclops remains hidden. Without physical evidence, the ship's fate is pieced together only through incomplete records and the stories passed down. Some experts argue that the heavy manganese cargo played a critical role. The dense ore could have caused the ship's centre of gravity to shift dangerously if it moved during rough conditions. This sudden imbalance might have capsized the vessel quickly, leaving the crew no time to react. Yet, if this happened, why was no wreckage ever found? The ocean floor in that region is rugged, but the lack of debris raises questions. The Cyclops was part of a trio of sister ships, all collier vessels named after giants from mythology. Interestingly, the other two ships also suffered tragic fates, reinforcing the eerie reputation of this class of vessels. The USS Proteus and USS Nereus both disappeared during World War II, lost in similar mysterious circumstances. This pattern deepens the Cyclops mystery, suggesting something beyond mere coincidence. Families of those lost in the Cyclops disaster formed support groups and lobbied for continued investigations. Memorials were established, honouring the courage and sacrifice of the men who vanished without a trace. Their names are inscribed on monuments, a sombre reminder of the ocean's unforgiving power and the unknown dangers that sailors face. The story of the USS Cyclops has been revisited in books, documentaries, and popular culture. Its place in the lore of the Bermuda Triangle has given it a legendary status, but the true cause remains hidden. Without wreckage or survivors, the final chapter of the Cyclops is left unwritten, haunting the minds of those who seek the truth. Even with all the advancements in technology and ocean exploration, the sea guards its secrets fiercely. The Cyclops, once a proud and powerful ship, vanished without a sound, swallowed by the deep. Its disappearance serves as a chilling reminder that despite human ingenuity, nature still holds mysteries that elude understanding. What happened to the crew during those last moments remains unknown. Were they victims of an unseen disaster, or did something else take the ship and its people? The ocean's silence offers no answers. The story of the USS Cyclops is a stark example of how the sea can erase history and leave behind only questions. In the end, the Cyclops mystery is not just about a missing ship, but about the fragile line between man and nature. It warns of the dangers lurking beneath calm waters and the sudden, terrible events that can unfold without warning. The vanished ship continues to drift through time, a ghostly presence in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The disappearance of the Carroll A. Deering. The Carroll A. Deering was a 5-masted schooner built in 1919, known for its impressive size and speed. Originally designed for cargo, it became famous not for what it carried, but for how it vanished under mysterious and unsettling circumstances. The ship's last confirmed sighting was in January 1921, near the Cape Lookout Lighthouse off the coast of North Carolina. When the Deering was found weeks later, it was completely deserted, abandoned without any crew on board, and no clear explanation for their disappearance. The mystery of what happened to the Carroll A. Deering remains one of the most disturbing maritime puzzles of the early 20th century. The ship was discovered on January 31, 1921, run aground on a sandbar near Diamond Shoals. Her sails were set, but the rigging was in disarray. There was no sign of the crew, and the lifeboats were missing. The ship's log was nowhere to be found, and the navigation equipment was either missing or damaged. Inside the cabin, meals sat half-eaten on the table, as if the crew had simply vanished mid-action. Nothing indicated a violent struggle or piracy, leaving authorities baffled about the circumstances that led to such a sudden abandonment. Initial investigations revealed the ship had passed through the treacherous waters of the Bermuda Triangle. This fact fed speculation that supernatural forces or bizarre natural phenomena might have caused the crew's disappearance. However, no concrete evidence ever supported these theories. The weather at the time of the Deering's disappearance was reported as calm, with no severe storms or hurricanes that might have forced an evacuation. The ship itself showed no signs of damage consistent with a struggle or collision, deepening the mystery of its ghostly appearance. The US Coast Guard and Navy conducted extensive searches, questioning nearby vessels and examining surrounding waters, but no trace of the missing crew was found. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the Deering sailing erratically in the days before she was abandoned. Others reported hearing distress signals, though no official radio transmissions were ever recorded. Theories ranged from mutiny to sabotage, but none could be proven, and the fate of the crew remained a haunting unknown. The cargo aboard the Caroline Deering consisted mainly of coal, a common freight for the era, with no apparent reason for piracy or theft. Some believed that the crew might have encountered dangerous pirates, but no pirate attacks were reported in that area during that period. The ship's abandonment without resistance or signs of struggle contradicted such ideas. Instead, it seemed as though the crew left voluntarily but under mysterious urgent circumstances. Among the more unsettling theories was that of a seaquake or underwater explosion near the shoals, possibly causing a sudden and terrifying event that forced the crew into lifeboats or the sea. If this were true, the lifeboats would have been their only chance of survival, yet none were ever found. The possibility of a catastrophic structural failure was also considered, but the ship's relatively intact condition argued against this. Some experts suggested that a combination of navigational errors and bad luck might have left the crew stranded or lost in the dangerous waters of the Atlantic. Over time, the Caroline Deering's story gained a legendary status, fueling legends of hauntings and curses. Local fishermen and sailors whispered about the phantom ship, claiming it sailed without a crew or appeared suddenly before vanishing again. These tales, while dramatic, only served to keep the mystery alive in public imagination, overshadowing the more likely but mundane explanations. The GOO-WL Bird Company, the ship's owner, was deeply affected by the loss. Financially and emotionally, the disappearance was a heavy blow. Investigations extended beyond the initial search, with legal inquiries into the circumstances of the ship's last voyage. Some documents suggested that the captain, William Meyer, had expressed concerns about the ship's seaworthiness and safety before departure, but these warnings were reportedly ignored. Captain Meyer's fate, like that of his crew, was never determined, leaving a void that grew with each passing year. Public interest surged as newspapers across the country published sensational stories and theories. The mysterious fate of the Deering became a cautionary tale for sailors and ship owners alike, a reminder of the unpredictable dangers of the sea. Some scholars later tried to connect the disappearance to other strange events in the area, linking it to a pattern of unexplained vanishings along the Atlantic coast during that time. Despite numerous searches and investigations, the Caroline Deering's crew was never found, and no further evidence surfaced. The ship's remains were salvaged and eventually sold, but the empty vessel was never the same. Its ghostly image has endured in maritime folklore, a symbol of the ocean's hidden dangers and the mysteries that refuse to be solved. Modern researchers have revisited the case using new methods and technology. Underwater surveys have explored areas near the ship's last known location, searching for wreckage or clues. Though no definitive evidence has emerged, these efforts keep the memory of the Deering alive. The unanswered questions continue to puzzle historians and enthusiasts, maintaining a quiet but persistent intrigue. The disappearance of the Carol A. Deering serves as a chilling example of how quickly the ocean can swallow lives and stories, leaving behind only fragments and silence. The lack of concrete answers fuels speculation, but the truth may be forever lost beneath the waves. The sea remains a place where human understanding often meets its limits, and Deering's story stands as a haunting reminder. What became of Captain Meyer and his crew? Were they victims of an unseen danger, or did they face some internal crisis that forced their disappearance? The evidence provides no clear direction, only a trail of questions that deepen with time. The mystery persists, lingering like a fog over the treacherous shoals where the ship was found. In the final reckoning, the Caroline Deering stands for something beyond being merely lost. It embodies the fragile boundary between human endeavour and the vast, indifferent sea. Its ghostly voyage continues to captivate those who look to the ocean for answers that remain just out of reach. The mysterious disappearance of Flight 19. The Bermuda Triangle, a vast stretch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda and Puerto Rico, has long been a place where ships and planes disappear without explanation. Among countless tales of vanished vessels, one case stands out as the most baffling and disturbing. It involved a commercial flight, Flight 19, which vanished on December 5, 1945, during a routine training mission. The story of Flight 19 has become a symbol of the Bermuda Triangle's enduring mystery, raising questions about what could have caused a squadron of experienced pilots to simply vanish into thin air. Flight 19 consisted of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, each crewed by skilled Navy aviators. Led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, the group took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a clear morning. Their mission was a simple navigation and bombing training exercise over the Atlantic. As they flew eastward, Taylor reported that his compass was malfunctioning and the planes were lost. What followed was a series of confusing radio messages filled with uncertainty and concern, but the last transmission left more questions than answers. Rescue efforts began immediately when Flight 19 failed to return. A PBM Mariner flying boat was dispatched to find the missing planes, but it too disappeared, adding to the tragedy. Search teams scoured the ocean for days, combing vast areas but finding no trace of the planes or their crews. The official Navy report called the event a mystery of the first order, and despite decades of investigation, no conclusive explanation has ever emerged. The vanished flight became the focal point of the Bermuda Triangle legend, attracting speculation and fear. In the immediate aftermath, investigators uncovered that Lieutenant Taylor's navigation confusion may have stemmed from more than just a faulty compass. Testimonies from other pilots suggested that unusual magnetic anomalies had been reported in the area days before the flight, potentially interfering with compasses and other instruments. This area of the Atlantic, notorious for sudden shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, could have disoriented even the most experienced aviators. Additionally, the training exercise's planned route required complex navigation maneuvers over open water with few landmarks, making visual references impossible and relying heavily on instruments that might have been compromised. These details add a layer of technical complexity to an already baffling disappearance, highlighting how small errors or unexpected environmental factors could cascade into disaster. Adding to the mystery was the fate of the PBM Mariner rescue plane sent to find Flight 19. Shortly after takeoff, the Mariner sent a distress signal reporting engine trouble and citing an oil slick on the water. Then, all contact was lost. The crash site was never found and no survivors were recovered. This second disappearance in the same region within hours intensified speculation about hidden dangers in the Bermuda Triangle. It suggested that the area was not just unlucky but actively perilous, capable of causing multiple catastrophic events in a short period. The simultaneous loss of Flight 19 and its rescuers remains one of the most disturbing aspects of this enduring mystery. Many theories were proposed to explain the disappearance. Some suggested pilot error, believing that the crew might have become disoriented and run out of fuel over the water. Others pointed to mechanical failures or sudden severe weather. There were even ideas that the planes might have crashed after flying into a freak storm or powerful downdrafts. Yet the weather records from that day showed mostly calm skies and mild winds, challenging these explanations. The fact that experienced Navy pilots disappeared without a distress signal intensified the enigma. Over the years, more elaborate and disturbing theories surfaced. Some claimed that supernatural forces or alien abductions were responsible, turning Flight 19 into a paranormal mystery. Others imagined underwater vortexes or magnetic anomalies that interfered with navigation instruments. While these ideas captured the imagination of many, they lacked evidence and were dismissed by most experts. Still, the mystery persisted, fueling books, documentaries, and endless debate. The loss of Flight 19 was not the only disappearance linked to the Bermuda Triangle, but it remains the most well-documented and troubling. The incident involved trained military personnel, reliable aircraft, and a carefully planned mission, yet it ended in total vanishing. The subsequent loss of the PBM Mariner, with 13 crew members aboard, only added to the growing sense that something was profoundly wrong in those waters. Witnesses on nearby ships and planes reported unusual lights and strange sounds in the area during the days following the disappearance. Some claim to have seen burning wreckage on the water's surface or heard distant explosions. However, no wreckage was ever recovered, and these reports were never verified. The lack of physical evidence allowed speculation to thrive and left the tragedy open to interpretation. The families of the missing pilots were devastated. Many fought for answers and pushed for more thorough investigations. Memorial services were held, and their names were inscribed on monuments dedicated to lost aviators. Despite the pain and unanswered questions, the disappearance of Flight 19 became a symbol of the dangers faced by those who serve, especially in the unforgiving environment of the sea and sky. In the decades since, technological advances have made it possible to explore the Bermuda Triangle's depths more thoroughly than ever before. Sonar mapping and underwater drones have searched for wreckage, but the ocean remains stubbornly silent. Some researchers argue that natural explanations, such as sudden methane gas eruptions from the seafloor, could have caused the planes to lose control. These methane bubbles might reduce the water's density, causing ships to sink rapidly or planes to stall. Still, this theory cannot fully explain the absence of any physical wreckage or survivors. The Bermuda Triangle continues to fascinate and terrify in equal measure. It serves as a reminder of the ocean's vast power and the limits of human knowledge. The story of Flight 19 stands at the center of this enigma, a squadron of young men lost in an instant, leaving behind only unanswered questions and speculation. Why did Flight 19 disappear so completely? Was it simply a tragic accident, or did forces beyond our understanding intervene? The silence of the ocean and the absence of evidence ensure that the mystery remains alive, lingering like a shadow over the waters of the Bermuda Triangle. This baffling case challenges us to confront the unknown and acknowledge the sea's capacity to hold secrets that refuse to be revealed. The strange signals of the MV Joyita. In the vast expanse of the South Pacific, the MV Joyita once sailed as a small merchant vessel, carrying passengers and cargo between the islands. It was a modest but sturdy ship, built in 1931, and well suited for its routine trips across often turbulent waters. The Joyita's story, however, took a dark and mysterious turn in October 1955, when it was found drifting aimlessly near the Tonga archipelago, completely abandoned. The discovery shocked the maritime world because the ship was still afloat and largely intact, yet none of the 25 people on board, crew and passengers alike, were anywhere to be found. The Joyita had departed from Apia, Samoa, on October 3rd, bound for Auckland, New Zealand. The voyage was expected to take several days, and the weather was reportedly fair. When the ship failed to arrive at its destination, concern grew. A search was launched, and on October 10th the Joyita was spotted by another vessel about 600 miles north of its intended course. The sight was eerie. The ship was listing heavily to one side, some of its lifeboats were missing, and the radio equipment was found destroyed. Despite the damage, the hull was still watertight, and the engines were in working order. The boarding party that approached the Joyita found a scene frozen in time but filled with unsettling clues. Among the most puzzling discoveries was a nearly empty freshwater tank, indicating the crew may have been without adequate drinking water for some time. Additionally, the ship's engine room showed signs of recent repairs made in haste, suggesting mechanical troubles that might have contributed to the abandonment. Personal belongings lay scattered throughout the ship, as though the people had left suddenly or been taken unexpectedly. The galley still had food prepared, some even half-eaten, and the ship's logbook was missing. No signs of struggle or violence were apparent, yet the entire crew and passengers had vanished without a trace. The ship's radio call sign was scratched off, making communication impossible, and the distress signals that should have alerted nearby vessels had never been sent. One of the most perplexing aspects of the case involved the ship's radio signals. Investigators learned that the Joyita had sent out strange, garbled transmissions in the hours before its abandonment. Some intercepted messages were fragmented and indecipherable, while others seemed to include distress codes mixed with nonsensical strings of letters and numbers. Intriguingly, an analysis of the radio frequencies revealed irregular spikes that could indicate deliberate jamming or interference, though no source was ever identified. These cryptic signals have never been fully explained and only deepened the mystery surrounding the ship's final hours. Experts have speculated on what might have caused such strange radioactivity. One theory suggested that the radio equipment suffered an electrical failure, causing the confusing transmissions. Others thought that someone aboard might have been attempting to send a distress call but lacked proper training or was overcome by panic. The fact that the transmissions were never clear enough to prompt a timely rescue effort adds a tragic element to the story, perhaps a desperate plea for help that was never understood. Theories about the disappearance of the Joyita's people range from piracy and mutiny to natural disasters like rogue waves or sudden storms. However, no evidence supported violent conflict or storm damage sufficient to force the crew to abandon ship. The surrounding waters were calm at the time the ship was found, and the lack of external damage made many of these explanations unlikely. Some have even suggested more speculative ideas, such as the crew being victims of a sudden illness or poisoning, but no definitive proof has emerged. The mystery deepened when investigators found that the ship's lifeboats were missing, yet none were ever recovered or spotted by search teams. This absence raised questions about whether the passengers and crew had left the vessel intentionally or had been swept away by something unknown. The sea can be merciless, but the complete lack of bodies or debris fueled more speculation and despair. Adding to the intrigue, the Joyita's logbook had a peculiar gap in entries during the final days of the voyage. This gap suggested that something disrupted normal record keeping, whether through malfunction, fear, or other causes. The missing pages from the logbook left a void in understanding the timeline and events leading up to the ship's abandonment, making it impossible to piece together what the crew experienced. Local islanders told stories of strange lights seen near the Joyita's last known location and unexplained noises in the night, contributing to whispers of supernatural involvement. While such tales belong more to folklore than fact, they reflect how deeply the ship's disappearance haunted those familiar with the ocean's unpredictable nature. The MV Joyita became a ghost ship, not just in its physical state, but in the stories and legends that grew around it. Despite numerous investigations by maritime authorities and private researchers, the fate of the Joyita's people remains unknown. Advances in underwater exploration and technology have failed to uncover wreckage or evidence that could explain their vanishing. The ship itself was eventually towed to port and repaired, but it never returned to service, carrying with it the weight of unanswered questions. Subsequent crew members who sailed the repaired Joyita reported inexplicable mechanical failures and sudden equipment malfunctions, fueling rumours that the ship was somehow cursed or haunted. The MV Joyita's case illustrates how the sea can present puzzles that defy logic and reason. Ships, people, and time itself can disappear, leaving behind only scattered clues and haunting silence. The strange signals sent by the Joyita before its abandonment remain one of the most perplexing pieces of this maritime enigma, a reminder that sometimes the last cries for help go unheard or misunderstood. Today, the Joyita's story continues to fascinate and frighten those who study maritime mysteries. It serves as a chilling testament to the dangers of the ocean and the fragile boundary between survival and loss. The silence that followed those strange signals is a haunting echo, inviting us to wonder what really happened on that isolated ship in the vast South Pacific. The eerie fate of the Flannon Isles Lighthouse Keepers. The Flannon Isles Lighthouse stood alone on a remote group of rocky islands off the west coast of Scotland. Built to guide ships through the dangerous waters, the lighthouse was manned by a small team of keepers responsible for maintaining its light and ensuring the safety of passing vessels. On December 15, 1900, a supply ship arrived to relieve the lighthouse keepers, but what the crew found would spark one of the most chilling maritime mysteries in history. The three men who tended the lighthouse, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, had vanished without a trace. When the relief crew reached the lighthouse, the first thing they noticed was an eerie silence. The oilskins and hats of the keepers were still hanging, and meals were prepared but uneaten. The lighthouse itself was in good condition, but the clock had stopped, and the logbook contained puzzling entries. Investigators noted that the lighthouse's lamps were still fueled, and the machinery showed no signs of malfunction. Footprints were found outside leading toward the cliffs, but they abruptly ended at the edge, with no indication that the men had returned. Inside, some personal belongings, including a set of oilskins, were left behind, which suggested the keepers might have left suddenly and without proper preparation for harsh weather. Additionally, the lighthouse's barometer, a key tool for monitoring storms, had been smashed, hinting at either a struggle or an attempt to break it during extreme conditions. Letters discovered months later, written by one of the keepers to family members, revealed their concern about strange lights and unusual waves around the islands. These letters described a growing sense of dread among the men in the weeks before their disappearance, hinting that they believed something unnatural was affecting the area. The combination of these personal notes and the final log entries painted a picture of men on edge, possibly experiencing phenomena beyond normal explanation, but still committed to their duties until the very end. Rescue crews reported hearing unexplained noises during their search, including eerie whistles and what sounded like voices carried by the wind. These accounts, though anecdotal, contributed to the legend surrounding the Flannon Isles. Some theorists have proposed that the men might have been victims of a rare weather phenomenon called a waterspout, a tornado over the ocean, which could have struck suddenly and swept them into the sea. Whatever the cause, these details underline how the mystery is not just about vanished men, but about forces beyond human control or understanding. It described a severe storm battering the island days earlier, though weather records showed no storms in the area during that time. The most troubling detail was that the last entry in the logbook mentioned strange lights seen offshore and an unexplained feeling of unease. Search parties combed the rugged cliffs and surrounding waters, but found no sign of the missing men. Their disappearance baffled officials and locals alike. Some speculated that the men might have been swept away by a rogue wave while trying to secure equipment outside the lighthouse during the storm. Others wondered if they had fallen victim to foul play, or even succumbed to madness brought on by isolation. None of these theories fully explained the strange circumstances or the mysterious final log entries. The isolation of the Flannon Isles contributed to the eerie atmosphere surrounding the case. The lighthouse was hundreds of miles from the nearest inhabited land, and the keepers often spent weeks in solitude. Loneliness and harsh weather could take a toll on anyone, and some have suggested that the men might have experienced hallucinations or paranoia. Still, no evidence supported these psychological theories, and the men were known for their professionalism and reliability. Local folklore quickly embraced the mystery, giving rise to ghost stories and legends. Some claimed that the keepers had been taken by supernatural forces or sea spirits guarding the islands. Tales spoke of strange lights dancing over the water and ghostly figures seen near the lighthouse. While these stories lack proof, they reflect the deep unease that the unexplained disappearance inspired among those living nearby. The official inquiry into the incident concluded that the men were likely lost during a severe storm while attempting to secure equipment on the cliffs. However, this conclusion raised more questions than answers. Weather records from the time did not support the presence of such a storm, and the area was not known for sudden, violent waves. The physical condition of the lighthouse and the untouched supplies contradicted the idea of a sudden evacuation under threat. Years later, the Flannon Isles disappearance continued to captivate researchers and enthusiasts. Some modern theories propose that seismic activity or underwater landslides might have caused massive waves capable of sweeping the men away without warning. Others have pointed to the possibility of an accident caused by faulty equipment or human error. Despite these speculations, no new evidence has emerged to solve the puzzle definitively. The story of the Flannon Isles Lighthouse Keepers has been retold in poems, books and songs, cementing its place in maritime lore. The haunting silence of the lighthouse and the mystery of the vanished men symbolize the dangers of the sea and the fragility of human life in the face of nature's power. Their disappearance serves as a reminder of how quickly normal life can be swallowed by the unknown. For those who have visited the lighthouse since, a sense of solemn respect lingers. The isolated tower still stands as a sentinel against the stormy seas, but its history carries the weight of unanswered questions. The men who once kept its light burning remain forever lost in the shadows of the Flannon Isles, their fate a chilling enigma that continues to haunt the ocean's edge. What truly happened on those remote rocks more than a century ago? Were the keepers victims of nature's sudden wrath, or did something more sinister take them? The silence that followed their disappearance is as unsettling as the storm they supposedly faced. The mystery remains, echoing across time, challenging us to remember the cost of life at the edge of the world. the ghost ship Urang Madans' final distress call. In the early hours of June 1947, an eerie distress call was picked up by several ships navigating the busy shipping lanes near the Strait of Malacca. The message was chilling and incomprehensible, filled with frantic cries for help, followed by a sudden and unsettling silence. This haunting broadcast came from the Dutch freighter Urang Madan, a ship that would soon become one of the most famous ghost ships in maritime history. The fate of its crew and the cause of the distress call remain a disturbing mystery to this day. When nearby vessels responded to the SOS signals, they found the Urang Madan drifting without any visible signs of life. Boarding parties discovered the ship's decks littered with the bodies of the entire crew, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. No wounds or visible injuries explained their deaths, and the ship itself showed no signs of damage or attack. The radio equipment was still operational, but no further messages came from the doomed freighter after the initial distress call. The ship's captain, officers and crew all lay dead on the bridge and in the crew quarters, their bodies arranged as if they had been suddenly overwhelmed by an unknown force. Further examination revealed that many of the crew members appeared to have died simultaneously, with no signs of struggle or attempt to escape. The absence of blood or external injuries suggested a sudden cause, possibly internal or chemical. The eerie stillness on board contrasted sharply with the chaotic distress messages sent earlier. Some investigators hypothesized that the crew might have been exposed to a toxic gas, but no samples were taken before the ship was lost, leaving the theory unconfirmed. Recovered from the captain's cabin, the ship's logbook held strange entries made in the final hours before the distress call. Scribbled notes mentioned unbearable heat in the lower decks and a smell like burning sulphur spreading through the corridors. The log ended abruptly with a frantic scrawl that could only be partially deciphered. "All hands to abandon ship. Something is wrong. God help us." These haunting words remain one of the few clues about the crew's final moments. Strangely, several pages earlier in the log contained cryptic sketches of waves and jagged shapes that some later speculated could represent sea ice or an approaching storm, though their meaning has never been confirmed. Crew members from the rescue vessels described an oppressive atmosphere when boarding the Urang Madan. Several reported feelings of nausea, headaches and dizziness that vanished once they left the ship. Some even refused to step aboard, citing an inexplicable sense of dread. Whether psychological or caused by lingering toxins, these accounts add to the unsettling nature of the incident and hint that whatever affected the crew may have also threatened the rescuers. A lesser-known fact is that the Urang Madan's radio operator was found slumped over his equipment, with the microphone still pressed to his lips. This suggested he had been sending distress signals to the last possible moment, yet no subsequent calls were ever received. The silence following those desperate transmissions remains one of the most haunting aspects of the story, as if the ship itself had been swallowed by an unseen force. Some reports mention that the men's eyes were wide open and mouths agape, suggesting extreme panic in their final moments. Investigators who examined the ship struggled to find any logical explanation. Poisoning, violence, or mechanical failure seemed unlikely given the lack of physical evidence, deepening the enigma surrounding their deaths. Curiously, the Urang Madan was reportedly carrying a secret cargo, though no official records have ever confirmed what it was. Rumours circulated about hazardous chemicals or dangerous substances that might have leaked and caused a fatal gas to spread throughout the ship. Others suggested exposure to nerve agents or toxic fumes from an unknown source. Despite these theories, no conclusive evidence was ever found, and the ship's manifest remains a mystery. Adding to the intrigue, unofficial port records from Singapore hinted at a late-night loading of unregistered cargo just days before departure, witnessed only by a handful of dock workers who later refused to speak about it. Witnesses described a thick, unnatural fog surrounding the ship when it was first discovered, adding a ghostly atmosphere to the scene. Some crew members from the rescue vessels reported strange feelings of unease and dizziness when near the Urang Madan, as if some malevolent presence lingered on board. These accounts, while anecdotal, intensified the haunting reputation of the ship and fueled speculation about supernatural involvement. Shortly after the rescue ships attempted to tow the Urang Madan to the nearest port, a fire suddenly broke out in the cargo hold. Despite efforts to control the blaze, the fire rapidly consumed the ship. the freighter eventually exploded and sank beneath the waves, taking with it any chance of uncovering the truth behind the crew's mysterious deaths. The destruction of the Urang Madans only added to the legend, leaving questions that may never be answered. Some researchers have proposed that the distress call itself might have been a hoax or a case of mistaken identity. However, the consistency of the signal across multiple receivers and the detailed reports from the rescue crews make this unlikely. The story persisted, passed down through sailors and maritime enthusiasts as a chilling warning about the unknown dangers lurking in the world's oceans. The Urang Madans incident has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and investigations, each attempting to unravel the mystery. Despite decades of interest, the ship's story remains clouded in uncertainty. The lack of concrete evidence combined with the ship's fiery end means that the truth behind the ghostly distress call may be lost forever beneath the sea. When all is said and done, the Urang Madans stands as a grim symbol of how quickly life can be lost on the ocean and the many unknowns beneath its surface. The final, desperate signals sent from the ship echo across time, a haunting testament to terror and loss at sea. Whatever happened aboard that ghost ship continues to puzzle and unsettle, ensuring the legend of the Urang Madans remains alive in maritime history. The mystery of the lost submarine USS Scorpion. The USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered submarine of the United States Navy, vanished in May 1968 during a routine patrol mission in the Atlantic Ocean. At 252 feet long and armed with advanced weaponry, the Scorpion was a formidable vessel designed for silent, underwater operations during the height of the Cold War. Its disappearance shocked the Navy and the world because no distress signals were sent, and the submarine seemed to simply disappear from tracking systems. The loss of the Scorpion remains one of the most troubling and puzzling mysteries in naval history. On May 21, 1968, the Scorpion reported its position and status during a routine communication, but then fell silent. Over the next few days, attempts to contact the submarine failed. The Navy launched an extensive search operation that involved surface ships, aircraft, and underwater sensors, but no immediate signs of the Scorpion were found. Weeks later, debris and wreckage were discovered nearly 400 miles southwest of the Azores, confirming that the submarine had sunk. The exact cause of the sinking, however, was never definitively established. The debris field included scattered pieces of the hull, personal effects, and parts of the submarine's torpedo systems. Among the recovered items were fragments of the sub's communication equipment, which appeared heavily damaged. Investigators noted that some pieces showed signs of intense heat and pressure, hinting at a possible explosion or implosion event. The wide dispersion of wreckage suggested the submarine broke apart either at or near the surface before sinking rapidly. These details raised questions about whether an internal malfunction or external force caused the destruction, but with limited physical evidence, conclusions remained elusive. Deep-sea sonar scans helped map the main wreckage site, revealing that the submarine's hull was crushed inward in several sections, consistent with a catastrophic implosion caused by the immense pressure of the ocean. The depth where the wreckage was found was well within the submarine's operating limits, making a simple hull failure less likely. Experts speculated that the implosion might have been triggered by prior damage or a violent internal event, but the precise cause was impossible to confirm. This discovery complicated earlier theories and underscored the mystery of what exactly happened. In addition to technical investigations, interviews with former crew and naval officers brought forward reports of possible safety concerns aboard the Scorpion before its final mission. Some mentioned previous issues with the submarine's battery compartments and concerns about maintenance. These behind-the-scenes reports, though anecdotal, suggested that mechanical problems might have been brewing unnoticed. Whether these contributed to the sinking remains uncertain, but they add a human element to the tragedy, reminding us that even cutting-edge technology depends on rigorous upkeep and vigilance. Many theories arose about what happened to the Scorpion. Some experts suggested a mechanical failure, possibly a malfunction in the submarine's torpedo systems or reactor. Others speculated that an explosion inside the vessel might have led to a rapid and catastrophic loss. Given the tense Cold War environment, some believed the Scorpion could have been the victim of a secret attack by a foreign submarine or mine, though no evidence ever supported this. The Navy's official report concluded that the cause was unknown but likely accidental. One of the more haunting aspects of the Scorpion's disappearance is the complete lack of distress signals. Submarines are equipped with emergency communication devices, and in most disasters, crews have managed to send at least a partial warning. The silence of the Scorpion suggested either a sudden and overwhelming event or a failure of communication systems. Families of the 99 crew members were left with little information, facing months of uncertainty and grief. Investigations into the wreckage revealed damage consistent with a large underwater explosion. The submarine's bow section was crushed, and the hull was fractured in several places. Some theorists proposed that a torpedo aboard the submarine might have malfunctioned and exploded accidentally. Others argued that a fire in the engine room or battery compartments could have caused the disaster. However, none of these explanations could be confirmed with the limited physical evidence available. The Scorpion's loss also raised concerns about the safety and vulnerabilities of nuclear submarines. At the time, these vessels operated in relative secrecy, often submerged for months at a time. The incident exposed gaps in technology and emergency protocols that led to improvements in submarine safety standards. The tragedy also highlighted the risks faced by submariners who operate in one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Some crew members of other submarines reported hearing strange underwater sounds around the time of the Scorpion's disappearance. These noises, described as deep rumblings or explosions, were recorded by underwater listening devices but could never be conclusively linked to the Scorpion. The mysterious acoustic events remain a topic of debate among sonar experts and historians, adding another layer of uncertainty to the case. The search for the Scorpion's wreckage was one of the most challenging underwater recovery missions of its time. The Navy employed deep-sea submersibles and sonar mapping to locate the debris field in the Atlantic. The ocean floor in that area is rugged and difficult to navigate, which complicates efforts to study the wreck. Despite these challenges, the discovery of the submarine's remains provided crucial, though incomplete, insights into the final moments of the vessel. For the families of the lost crew, the tragedy was devastating. Memorials were established to honor the 99 men who perished, and their names are inscribed at the United States Navy Submarine Memorial in Connecticut. The Scorpion's disappearance became a solemn reminder of the dangers inherent in underwater warfare and the sacrifices made by those who serve beneath the waves. In the decades since, the USS Scorpion has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and analyses. While new technologies and archival research have shed some light on possible causes, the mystery of the submarine's final hours remains unsolved. The exact sequence of events leading to the loss may never be fully known, as the depths of the ocean keep many secrets hidden. The story of the USS Scorpion is more than a tale of a lost vessel. It is a reflection of human courage, technological ambition, and the perils that come with exploring the unknown. The silence that followed its disappearance echoes through naval history, a haunting reminder of lives lost beneath the waves and questions that refuse to be answered. The unexplained loss of the MV Darbisher. Built in 1976, the MV Darbisher was a large British bulk carrier meant to transport vast amounts of iron ore and coal across global seas. Measuring 820 feet long and weighing over 91,000 tons, it was one of the largest ships of its kind when it set out on what would become its final voyage. On September 9, 1980, the Darbisher sank during a powerful typhoon in the Pacific Ocean, taking all 44 crew members with it. The loss of the ship and its crew is one of the deadliest in British maritime history and remains surrounded by mystery and unanswered questions. The Darbisher left Japan in early September, bound for Canada, carrying a heavy load of iron ore. The weather reports warned of an approaching typhoon, but the captain believed the ship was strong enough to withstand the storm. As the ship sailed deeper into the Pacific, the typhoon's intensity grew, and the Darbisher was caught in its full force. The last distress signal came on September 9th, describing worsening conditions but giving no indication of the disaster that would follow. Rescue efforts were launched after the Darbisher failed to reach port, but the storm had passed by then, and no trace of the ship or crew was immediately found. It wasn't until weeks later that debris and bodies washed ashore on islands hundreds of miles away. The ship itself was missing, lost somewhere beneath the vast ocean waves. Families waited anxiously for answers, but the reasons for the sinking remained unknown. At the start, investigators thought the ship might have succumbed to the storm's fierce waves, breaking up as a result. Some crew members from other vessels navigating the same storm reported hearing a series of loud cracking and banging noises on the Darbisher's radio frequencies just hours before the last distress call. These sounds hinted at structural strain and possible equipment failures aboard the ship as it battled the waves. Maritime experts later analysed these recordings, suggesting that the stresses on the hull and hatch covers could have reached critical levels, leading to catastrophic failure. This insight provided the first real indication that the Darbisher's sinking involved more than just overwhelming weather. Structural problems aside, the ship's loading techniques were also put under investigation. The heavy iron ore cargo, if not evenly distributed, could have caused dangerous imbalances in the ship's stability. Some reports indicated that the Darbisher might have been carrying more weight than recommended, or improperly secured cargo. Such factors would have made the vessel more vulnerable to capsizing or rapid flooding in severe weather. These loading issues, combined with design weaknesses, painted a more complex picture of the disaster, highlighting human error alongside natural forces. According to some experts, structural weaknesses in the Darbisher's hull left it open to harm from intense waves and gusting winds. However, the ship had passed inspections and was considered seaworthy. This contradiction puzzled investigators and fueled speculation that more complex factors were involved. The search for the Darbisher's wreckage began in earnest in the late 1990s, almost 2 decades after it disappeared. Advances in underwater technology allowed deep-sea exploration teams to locate the ship's remains at the bottom of the Pacific, about 12,000 feet below the surface. The discovery was a breakthrough, providing the first chance to examine the wreck closely and understand what happened during those final hours. Examination of the wreck revealed extensive damage to the bow section, including a large breach that appeared to have allowed water to flood the ship rapidly. Investigators concluded that the front of the ship had been ripped open, possibly by the force of giant waves crashing over the deck. The flooding of the forward compartments would have caused the Darbisher to lose stability and sink quickly, giving the crew little chance to respond. Regardless of these findings, numerous questions still hung in the air. Some argued that design flaws in the ship's hatch covers, which protect the cargo holds from water, may have contributed to the disaster. Tests showed that these covers could fail under extreme pressure, allowing water to enter the ship. The company that built the Darbisher denied any flaws, but the possibility sparked concerns about the safety of other bulk carriers operating under similar conditions. The tragedy of the Darbisher highlighted the dangers faced by large cargo ships in severe weather, especially when carrying heavy loads. It prompted changes in maritime regulations, including stricter standards for ship construction and equipment. The sinking also raised awareness of the risks posed by typhoons and extreme ocean conditions, encouraging better forecasting and navigation strategies. Survivors from other ships caught in the same storm described waves towering over 80 feet high, and winds that shattered equipment and decks. Such conditions would have tested even the strongest vessels. The Darbisher's crew, experienced and well-trained, faced impossible odds as they battled the storm. The fact that no one survived made the sinking all the more tragic and mystifying. Families of the lost crew members campaigned for years to have the Darbisher officially recognised as lost at sea due to structural failure, rather than just a storm accident. Their efforts helped bring attention to the issues with bulk carrier safety and pushed for further investigations. Memorials now honour the 44 men who perished, serving as a reminder of the human cost of maritime disasters. The sinking of the MV Darbisher remains one of the most haunting maritime tragedies of the 20th century. The combination of natural forces and possible design flaws created a deadly situation that overwhelmed the ship and its crew. Even with advances in technology and knowledge, the sea holds on to many secrets, and the full truth of what happened that stormy night is still only partly understood. The Darbisher's story serves as a solemn reminder of the power of the ocean and the vulnerability of those who sail it. The silence that followed the ship's disappearance echoes through maritime history, urging continued vigilance and respect for the sea's unpredictable might. The vanishing crew of the SS Waritar. Known for its speed and luxury, the SS Waritar was a passenger and cargo ship built in 1908, and often referred to as the Titanic of the South. The ship was designed to carry passengers between Australia and South Africa, crossing the dangerous seas of the Southern Ocean. On July 26, 1909, the Waritar set sail from Durban, South Africa, bound for Cape Town and then on to Australia. The ship was carrying 211 passengers and crew, but it never completed its journey. It vanished without a trace, sparking one of the greatest maritime mysteries of the early 20th century. Nearby vessels reported that the Waritar met rough waters and strong gusts shortly after leaving port. The last confirmed sighting was near the coast of South Africa, where the ship appeared to be struggling against heavy waves. Despite sending a few vague messages about the weather, the Waritar never sent a distress call or indicated serious trouble. After it failed to arrive in Cape Town, search efforts began, but no wreckage or survivors were ever found. Maritime experts were left stumped by the sudden vanishing of the Waritar. Though considered a marvel of its time, the Waritar had raised some concerns even before its final voyage. Some crew members and maritime experts questioned the ship's stability, noting its unusually high superstructure and relatively narrow hull. Tests conducted during sea trials showed a tendency for the ship to roll more than expected in rough seas. These design concerns, while never officially labelled dangerous, hinted at potential vulnerabilities when facing the violent waves of the Southern Ocean. Such structural characteristics may have played a critical role in the ship's sudden disappearance. In the days leading up to the Waritar's last known position, other vessels reported spotting the ship navigating through turbulent weather. Some captains noted the Waritar seemed to list unnaturally at times, struggling against strong swells. These observations, while dismissed as typical for ocean voyages, later gained new significance in light of the ship's fate. Eyewitness accounts also mentioned that the Waritar's crew appeared tense, possibly aware of the challenges posed by the storm. These details suggest the crew may have been battling more than just the sea. A lesser-known piece of the puzzle involves the cargo the Waritar was carrying on that fateful voyage. The ship transported a mix of general goods and livestock, including several hundred sheep. The movement and weight of the live animals could have contributed to instability, especially during the violent storm. Improperly secured livestock combined with rough seas might have caused shifts in the ship's balance, exacerbating the roll and hastening the vessel's capsizing. This factor adds a human and logistical element to the tragedy, showing how multiple risks converged that night. Considered reliable and properly maintained, the ship sailed under the command of seasoned officers and crew. Its construction followed the highest standards of the time, and it had recently passed safety inspections. Yet the ship seemed to vanish from the face of the ocean, leaving behind only questions and theories that still linger today. Perhaps the most unsettling part of the case was the total lack of any trace. No lifeboats, debris or bodies washed ashore along the southern African coast. The vast expanse of the Southern Ocean, known for its unpredictable weather and treacherous currents, may have swallowed the Waritar whole. The disappearance suggested a sudden and catastrophic event, but what that event was remained unclear. Speculation about the Waritar's fate varied widely. Some believed the ship capsized after cargo shifted in rough seas, causing it to list and sink quickly. Others thought a structural failure might have caused the ship to break apart. There were also rumours of a fire or explosion on board, though no evidence ever supported this. The lack of concrete information allowed wild theories to flourish, including suggestions of piracy or sabotage, though these were never substantiated. Search parties scoured the ocean for months, but the harsh conditions made recovery efforts nearly impossible. The Southern Ocean's powerful storms and cold temperatures can quickly destroy or scatter wreckage, making it difficult to locate a sunken vessel. Despite advances in search technology over the years, the Waritar's final resting place remains unknown. Its disappearance has become a symbol of the dangers faced by mariners in some of the world's most hostile waters. The Waritar's vanishing had a lasting impact on shipping regulations and safety measures. It highlighted the need for better communication systems, especially in remote ocean regions. Ships today are equipped with advanced technology that allows for constant contact and tracking, a direct response to tragedies like the Waritar's. The loss also led to more stringent cargo securing procedures to prevent shifting loads during storms. Families of the lost passengers and crew waited in hope for news that never came. Memorials were erected in South Africa and Australia, honouring those who vanished at sea. The Waritar's story has been passed down through generations as a haunting reminder of lives lost to the unpredictable ocean. It remains a topic of fascination for historians and maritime enthusiasts alike. In recent decades, expeditions have attempted to locate the wreckage using sonar and underwater drones. Each search added new clues but failed to provide definitive answers. Some researchers point to the possibility that the ship sank far from its last known position, carried by currents or winds. Others believe the Waritar may have foundered close to shore, but was quickly consumed by the ocean's depths. The disappearance of the SS Waritar remains one of the most chilling mysteries in maritime history. The silence that followed its last voyage is as unsettling as the violent seas it sailed. Whatever happened to the ship and its crew is lost beneath waves that continue to conceal their secrets. The Waritar's story serves as a solemn testament to the ocean's power and the fragility of life upon it. The legend of the Octavius, frozen in ice. In the vast icy waters of the Arctic Ocean, a strange and haunting tale has lingered for centuries, the legend of the Octavius. This ship, supposedly discovered frozen in the ice decades after it vanished, has captured imaginations with its eerie story of mystery and tragedy. According to accounts passed down through sailors and explorers, the Octavius was found drifting silently among the ice floes, its crew preserved in time, frozen in their final moments. Despite the intrigue surrounding the tale, no official records or evidence conclusively confirm the ship's existence, making it one of the most enduring maritime legends of the frozen North. The story begins in the late 18th century when the Octavius, a British merchant vessel, set sail from England on a trading voyage. The ship was heavily laden with valuable cargo and provisions intended for ports in the East Indies. Reports claim that after disappearing for years without contact, the Octavius was eventually spotted by a whaling ship navigating the treacherous Arctic waters near Greenland. The whalers, curious and cautious, approached the ghostly vessel only to discover a chilling scene frozen in time. The ship was locked in ice, and its crew appeared lifeless, frozen at their posts as if suddenly caught in an eternal moment. Witnesses described the crew's expressions as hauntingly calm, suggesting that they had died peacefully despite the ship's grim fate. The captain was reportedly found at his desk, with a quill in hand and a logbook open before him. According to some versions of the story, the logbook contained strange entries that stopped abruptly, with the last words describing thickening ice and worsening cold that threatened to freeze the crew alive. It mentioned attempts to navigate through the shifting ice fields and growing fears among the sailors as supplies ran low. A few writings gave unsettling details, phantom lights dancing on the horizon and sounds like whispers threading through the polar night. These unsettling entries contributed to the chilling atmosphere surrounding the Octavius and deepened the mystery of its fate. Further adding to the enigma, explorers who later claimed to have seen the frozen ship reported unusual damage to the hull, as if the ice had crushed parts of the vessel unevenly. Witnesses described claw-shaped grooves etched into the hull, their origin a mystery that invited whispers of monsters and spirits in the frozen seas. While these details are likely exaggerated or imagined, they have become an integral part of the legend, illustrating how fear and wonder intertwine in stories of the frozen North. The logbook, some said, contained entries detailing the ship's desperate struggle to navigate the icy waters and the crew's gradual descent into despair. These last entries allegedly chronicled the onset of freezing temperatures, dwindling supplies, and a growing sense of hopelessness as the ship became trapped in the unforgiving ice. No matter how compelling the accounts sound, the truth behind the Octavius has always been a matter of dispute. No physical evidence of the ship has ever been found, and its name does not appear in British shipping registers or historical records. Skeptics argue that the tale likely originated from maritime folklore or was exaggerated by storytellers eager to add mystery to the dangerous Arctic seas. However, the story has endured, fueled by the harsh reality of shipwrecks and disappearances common in polar exploration during that era. Some historians suggest that the legend may have been inspired by real events involving ships caught in the Arctic ice, such as the fate of Sir John Franklin's ill-fated expedition decades later. Ships trapped and lost in the Arctic ice were not uncommon, and crews faced extreme hardships, including starvation, exposure, and freezing conditions. The frozen tableau described in the Octavius legend echoes the tragic realities faced by many sailors who ventured into these hostile waters without the benefit of modern technology or rescue. Other versions of the story add a supernatural element. claiming that the Octavius was cursed or that the crew had been struck by a mysterious plague or poison that froze them in place. Some accounts speak of strange lights and ghostly apparitions seen near the ship after it was abandoned. These eerie details have helped the legend grow into a haunting maritime ghost story, often retold around fires and in sailors' pubs as a warning about the dangers lurking in icy seas. True or not, the tale of the Octavius reflects the harsh realities of early navigation through the Arctic. The unforgiving environment, with its shifting icebergs and sudden storms, posed a deadly challenge to mariners who had little knowledge or equipment suited for such conditions. Ships were at the mercy of the elements, and many vanished without explanation, leaving only stories and speculation behind. For modern explorers and historians, the Octavius represents the allure of unsolved maritime mysteries. The Arctic remains one of the most remote and difficult regions on Earth, and the idea of a ship frozen in time continues to spark curiosity and imagination. Whether fact or folklore, the story of the Octavius is a testament to the bravery and risks faced by sailors who dared to venture into the unknown. The legend also serves as a reminder of how the sea preserves history in unexpected ways. While some shipwrecks are scattered and broken by waves, the Arctic ice can act as a natural tomb, freezing moments in time and holding on to secrets for centuries. The Octavius story taps into a deep human fascination with lost worlds and frozen mysteries, keeping the past alive in the imagination. To this day, the Octavius lingers in uncertainty, mirroring the vast and silent Arctic. Without concrete evidence, it stands as a ghost story, part warning and part tribute to those lost in the ice. The frozen ship and its silent crew drift forever in the minds of those who hear the story, a chilling echo of a time when the ocean was even more mysterious and deadly than it is today. The disturbing case of the Lady Lovibond. On a crisp February day in 1748, the three-masted schooner Lady Lovibond left London, her course set for Oporto, Portugal. Her decks were polished, her rigging taut and her holds filled with cargo, but this was no ordinary voyage, for she also carried her captain, Simon Reed, and his new bride, Annetta, on what was meant to be a honeymoon at sea. The crew, a mix of seasoned sailors and a few younger hands, were in high spirits as they slipped down the Thames and into the English Channel, unaware that jealousy and resentment were brewing just beneath the surface. It is said that among those aboard was first mate John Rivers, a man who had long harboured feelings for Annetta, feelings he never voiced but which deepened into bitterness when she chose to marry Reed. Witnesses later claimed that Rivers kept his composure through the early days of the voyage, but his silence masked an anger that grew with every affectionate glance between the captain and his bride. As the ship approached the treacherous waters off Kent, the calm of the journey began to feel strained, though no one could have predicted the violence that was about to unfold. As they neared the infamous Goodwin Sands, a stretch of shifting shoals that had claimed countless ships, the weather remained clear, and the captain saw no reason to alter course. The sun dipped low, casting the water in a strange golden light, while the sound of the wind in the sails mixed with the gentle crash of waves. It was in this serene moment that Rivers allegedly seized his chance, storming the helm and striking down the man at the wheel before steering the ship toward the deadly shoals. Crew members shouted warnings, but their cries were drowned out by the sudden roar of surf breaking over hidden sandbars. The Lady Lovibond shuddered violently as her hull slammed into the submerged bank, the impact throwing men from their feet and snapping rigging like dry twigs. Water rushed into the lower decks as the crew scrambled to lower boats, but the tide was merciless, dragging the ship deeper into the sands. Accounts from those who watched from shore tell of the vessel breaking apart in a matter of minutes, her masts splintering and her lanterns disappearing beneath the waves. All hands were lost, and the wreck became just another grim addition to the long history of the Goodwin Sands. That might have been the end of it, had the Lady Lovibond not begun to appear again, not in wood and sail but in ghostly form. 50 years to the day after the disaster, a group of local fishermen swore they saw a three-masted schooner gliding over the very waters where the ship had gone down. Her sails were full though no wind stirred, her decks bathed in a pale green glow, and faint music drifted across the waves. The fishermen tried to signal her, but she vanished before their eyes, leaving nothing but the sound of the surf. Word spread quickly, and the legend grew as more sightings were reported at 50-year intervals. In 1848, the schooner was seen again by sailors aboard a coastal vessel who claimed they could make out figures moving on deck, their forms hazy but their movements purposeful, as though locked in the same moments before the crash. In 1898, a lifeboat crew reported nearly colliding with her, only for the ship to dissolve into mist. These tales became part of maritime lore, whispered in pubs and passed along docksides, always with the same eerie detail. The date was always February 13th, exactly 50 years since the wreck. Skeptics have long argued that these sightings were nothing more than optical illusions, caused by a combination of sea fog, moonlight, and the mind's tendency to shape patterns into familiar forms. The Goodwin Sands, after all, have been the stage for countless wrecks, and the air is often thick with the haze of shifting weather. Yet those who claim to have seen the Lady Lovibond insist that what they witnessed was too vivid, too deliberate, to be dismissed as a trick of the eye. Some even say they could hear the tolling of a bell, a sound no other ship in those waters carried. The most recent reported sighting came in 1948, when the captain of a fishing trawler described watching her sail directly across his bow, so close he could make out the lines of her figurehead and the white dress of a woman standing at the rail. He blinked, and she was gone. The sea empty except for the rolling waves. It is this encounter that keeps the legend alive today, for while no sightings were recorded in 1998, many believe the ship still haunts the Goodwin Sands, waiting for her next anniversary to appear. Some maritime historians suggest the Lady Lovibond's ghostly reappearance is tied to the violence of her end, the betrayal that led to her destruction, marking the site in some unexplainable way. Others see her as a cautionary tale, a story meant to remind sailors of the dangers of jealousy and the ever-present threat of the sea. Whatever the truth, the Goodwin Sands remain a place of quiet dread, where fishermen still glance over their shoulders on February nights, scanning the horizon for a pale green light that may never come. Even in the age of GPS and radar, some avoid the area entirely during the anniversary, unwilling to risk an encounter with the phantom schooner. For them, the Lady Lovibond is not just a story told to frighten you deckhands, but a part of the sea's dark memory, a reminder that some tragedies are not so easily left behind. And if, on some future February evening, a ship does appear where no ship should be, there will be those who watch in silence, wondering if they have just glimpsed a piece of the past refusing to sink. The unsolved disappearance of the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. The winter ice of the Canadian Arctic has swallowed many ships, but few stories are as haunting as the fate of the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. In 1845, these two vessels set out from England under the command of Sir John Franklin, tasked with navigating the last uncharted section of the Northwest Passage. The ships were equipped with the latest technology of the time, including reinforced hulls and steam engines, and carried provisions meant to last several years. At the outset, there was a quiet confidence in the mission's success, yet the sea and ice had their own plans, and no one from the expedition would live to tell the full story. As months turned into years without word, rescue missions were launched, combing through frozen bays and treacherous inlets in search of survivors. Fragments of the expedition's fate began to emerge, each more unsettling than the last. Inuit hunters told of strange encounters with starving men dragging lifeboats across the ice, their clothing ragged and their faces gaunt. Some claimed to have seen the ships trapped in thick ice, abandoned yet eerily intact, before they eventually vanished beneath the frozen waters. These oral accounts became some of the earliest clues, but without concrete evidence, much of what happened remained speculation. A breakthrough came in 1850 when search parties discovered the first graves on Beechey Island. 3 crew members, each buried with care, lay preserved in the permafrost as though they had died only days before. The sight of their pale, almost lifelike faces shocked the rescuers, and further investigation suggested that illness, possibly pneumonia or tuberculosis, had taken them early in the voyage. This only deepened the mystery, as the rest of the crew had continued onward into harsher conditions, facing a fate that would prove far worse than disease. Further west, more grisly signs began to surface. Abandoned campsites were found with scattered belongings, including silverware engraved with officers' names and torn pages from books. But the most disturbing discoveries were the butchered animal bones mixed with human remains, indicating that, in their final days, some members of the crew had turned to cannibalism to survive. The evidence suggested desperation beyond imagination. yet the exact sequence of events remained frustratingly unclear, as if the ice itself had erased the truth. For decades, the Erebus and Terror became ghost ships of legend, their disappearance inspiring countless theories and fueling maritime folklore. Some believed the ships had been crushed entirely by shifting ice, sinking instantly with all hands. Others thought they might still lie entombed somewhere deep in the Arctic, perfectly preserved and holding the answers to the crew's last moments. Each failed expedition to locate them only made their absence more haunting, as though they resisted being found. In certain searches, the ice seemed to change suddenly, accompanied by short-lived sonar signals that led some to think the ships had shifted beneath it. It wasn't until 2014 that the mystery began to unravel unexpectedly. After years of searching, a Canadian team located the wreck of the HMS Erebus in the icy waters near King William Island. The ship was remarkably well preserved, with much of its structure intact, offering the possibility of retrieving artifacts that could tell the crew's story. 2 years later, the HMS Terror was found in equally astonishing condition, resting upright on the seabed as if waiting to sail again. Both wrecks had been hidden in shallow water, a cruel irony given the decades of failed searches that had passed them by. Explorers who dived to the wrecks described an eerie stillness inside, with overturned tables, intact shelves, and even dinner plates lying where they had last been used. It was as though the men had stepped away only moments before disaster struck. These findings reignited interest in piecing together the events that led from confident departure to total catastrophe. What had gone so wrong that 2 state-of-the-art ships, stocked with years of supplies, ended in such despair? Analysis of the remains recovered from earlier searches provided chilling answers. Tests showed high levels of lead in the bones, likely from poorly soldered food tins and the ship's water systems, which could have confused poor decision-making and eventual collapse of the crew's ability to function. Combined with severe weather, ice entrapment, and possible scurvy, this toxic exposure may have sealed their fate. Recent studies also found traces of high levels of carbon monoxide in recovered artifacts, hinting at poorly ventilated heating systems that could have further weakened the crew's health. Yet there were still gaps in the timeline, moments no diary entry or skeletal analysis could fully explain. The Inuit oral histories, once treated as little more than legend, have proven essential in filling these gaps. Their accounts of men wandering, some succumbing where they stood, matched eerily with the physical evidence now uncovered. The final survivors likely abandoned the ships in a last, desperate attempt to reach safety overland, only to be claimed by the relentless cold and exhaustion before they could find rescue. Today, the Erebus and Terror lie under protective watch, slowly yielding their secrets to divers and archaeologists. Each recovered artifact, from navigational tools to personal items like combs and buttons, is a small piece of a much larger tragic puzzle. While the broad strokes of the expedition's downfall are now understood, the individual choices, fears, and final thoughts of those aboard remain locked away, perhaps forever, in the silence of the Arctic ice. The story of the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror is not simply about 2 ships lost to time. It is a stark reminder of the human limits in the face of nature's extremes. Even with the finest technology of their day, the men who sailed into the Northwest Passage were at the mercy of an environment that offered no forgiveness for error. Their journey has become a cautionary tale, one where courage and ambition met an unyielding wilderness, and the outcome was as inevitable as the long, frozen nights that surrounded them. The ghost lights of the SS Valencia's wreck. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks of Vancouver Island's southwest coast, and the cold Pacific wind carried the sharp smell of salt and seaweed through the night air. The SS Valencia had been gone for months, her broken hull claimed by the sea after one of the worst maritime disasters in the region's history, yet stories began to drift ashore almost as quickly as the wreckage. Sailors and coastal residents whispered of strange lights moving in the darkness near the site of the disaster, as if lanterns still swung in invisible hands, and the faint sound of voices calling through the fog. To those who'd seen the aftermath of the sinking, the thought of survivors somehow trapped there long after death was almost too much to accept. But the accounts kept coming, each one eerily similar to the last. The Valencia had set out from San Francisco on January 20th, 1906, bound for Seattle with more than 100 passengers and crew. Heavy weather drove her off course, and in the black hours of January 22nd, She struck a reef near Pachena Point. For 36 hours, the ship clung stubbornly to the rocks, while towering waves battered her sides, tearing away lifeboats and washing passengers into the freezing water. Only 37 people survived, and the bodies of many victims were never recovered. The horror of the disaster was well known, but what came after was what made the Valencia's story sink deeper into local legend. Not long after the sea had swallowed the last of her hull, fishermen reported seeing a fully lit ship drifting silently just beyond the breakers in the exact place where the Valencia had gone down. The lights did not flicker like a campfire or lantern on shore. They were steady and arranged in neat rows like the portholes of an ocean liner at night. Those who rowed closer claimed the glow would vanish in an instant, leaving only dark water and the whisper of the tide. One fisherman swore he had seen shadowy figures on the deck, their faces pale and turned toward the shore as though waiting for the rescue that would never come. By the winter of 1908, the sightings had spread beyond the fishermen. Lighthouse keepers at Pachena Point began recording strange reports in their logs, moving lights on the horizon when no ships were scheduled to pass, faint cries carried by the wind, and on one occasion, the unmistakable sound of a ship's bell ringing 3 times in the fog. These men were not prone to superstition. They lived with the sea's dangers every day and understood how fog, wind, and moonlight could trick the senses. Yet they wrote their accounts without embellishment, noting them with the same steady hand used to track tides and weather. One of the darker stories came from a crew on a rescue mission for another ship caught in those unforgiving waters. As they passed near the Valencia's wreck site, they saw what looked like a lifeboat drifting among the swells. Inside, they said, were human shapes sitting perfectly still, their faces turned away. The crew turned their own boat toward it, calling out, but as they drew close, the strange craft dissolved into the mist before their eyes. They searched the surrounding water but found nothing, not even debris. The ghost lights were not always stationary. Some who travelled the coastal waters at night told of a glowing shape that seemed to follow their ships, always keeping its distance but never falling behind. One crewman on a small freighter claimed that as they neared Cape Beale, a light appeared off their starboard side, matching their speed for nearly 20 minutes before vanishing beneath the waves as though pulled under by an unseen hand. No one on board could explain what they had witnessed, and though some dismissed it as bioluminescence from marine life, others said the glow was too steady, too organised to be anything natural. Years passed, but the stories did not fade. In 1910, a salvage diver exploring the wreck site reported seeing what he described as lantern light shining faintly from within one of the Valencia's collapsed passageways. The beam moved, as if carried by someone walking slowly through the darkened corridors. He tried to move closer, but a sudden shift in the current stirred the sand and silt into a thick cloud, cutting off his view. When it cleared, the light was gone and the diver was left alone in the cold, silent water. Even as late as the 1930s, long after the sea had scattered the Valencia's remains, the phantom ship was still seen. A group of loggers working near the coast claimed they spotted a fully rigged vessel glowing faintly in the moonlight, her outline shimmering as if half submerged in mist. They watched for several minutes before a wave seemed to roll over her completely, and when the foam cleared, she had vanished. Though they had never heard of the Valencia before that night, the description they gave matched her almost perfectly. Skeptics often pointed to the coast's dangerous geography and unpredictable weather. Low clouds could reflect the lights of passing ships far out to sea, creating illusions. Fog banks could carry sound in strange ways, making waves or distant engines sound like voices. Yet those explanations failed to account for the consistency of the reports, decades apart from people who had never met, all describing the same unnatural glow and the same ghostly silence that followed it. The fact that so many sightings occurred within sight of the wreck's location only deepened the mystery. Some believed the lights were a kind of residual echo, a replay of the disaster burned into the fabric of the place by the fear and suffering of those final hours. Others thought they might be the restless souls of the lost, still clinging to the place where they perished. A few even speculated that the Valencia's wreck had somehow slipped into a strange state between the physical and the spectral, reappearing now and then as a ghost ship doomed to relive its last moments forever. On calm nights when the water lies smooth as glass, locals say you can stand on the cliffs above the wreck site and see the faint trace of those lights far out to sea. They flicker for a moment, steady, deliberate, before fading back into darkness. Some swear they can hear the soft creak of ropes and the faint rush of water against a hull, sounds that vanish the moment you strain to hear them more clearly. Whether it is memory, imagination, or something far stranger, the legend of the Valencia's ghost light still holds a place in the uneasy heart of the Pacific Northwest. And so, more than a century after the storm claimed her, the SS Valencia remains adrift in the minds of those who know her story, her phantom lanterns still burning in the endless night, guiding no one home. The unanswered questions of the SS Highflyer explosion. The Gulf of Mexico lay quiet under a pale winter sky when the SS Highflyer first appeared on the horizon, her steel hull riding low in the water and her decks stacked with a cargo that made more than a few harbour officials uneasy. She was a freighter built for heavy loads, but on this voyage she carried not only large amounts of sulphur, but also a significant quantity of ammonium nitrate, a combination known for its volatile potential. For weeks, she'd been anchored near Texas City alongside another ship, the SS Grand Camp, as crews worked slowly to resolve a scheduling problem that had left them both waiting. What no one on shore could have predicted was how quickly that waiting would end in catastrophe, or how many unanswered questions it would leave behind. The first signs of trouble came on the morning of April 16, 1947, when smoke began to rise from the Grand Camp's hold. Dock workers saw it drifting lazily into the air, unaware that the fire smouldering below was feeding on highly explosive fertilizer. Moments later, the Grand Camp erupted in a massive blast that ripped through the port, scattering debris for miles and igniting fires that spread with terrifying speed. In the chaos that followed, the Highflyer remained intact but dangerously close to destruction, her crew scrambling to understand the extent of the danger they faced. The shockwave from the Grand Camp had damaged her hull and filled the surrounding water with flaming wreckage, yet she still floated, tethered to a disaster that was far from over. As smoke thickened over the harbour, authorities realised the Highflyer's cargo could not be left where it was. Tugboats were called in, their crews instructed to move the freighter away from the burning remains of the Grand Camp before the flames could reach her holds. But moving a ship so heavily loaded and already damaged was no simple task. Hours slipped by in a tense, exhausting effort to tow her into open water, the thick ropes straining against the weight and current. Meanwhile, heat and sparks from nearby fires crept closer, and some on the docks began to wonder whether the evacuation could be completed before the Highflyer's cargo turned the harbour into a second inferno. By late evening, the freighter had been moved several miles from the port, anchored in what was thought to be a safe position. The tugs withdrew, leaving her crew to monitor the situation, while rescue and clean-up operations continued closer to shore. The sense of relief was short-lived. Sometime after midnight, a second explosion tore through these quiet waters, this time from the Highflyer herself. The blast was so powerful that it was felt in nearby towns, shattering windows and sending a column of fire high into the night sky. When daylight returned, there was little left of the vessel but twisted steel and scorched debris floating in an oil-slicked sea. What exactly triggered the Highflyer's explosion has never been established beyond speculation. Some reports suggested that fires from the Grand Camp's blast had continued to smoulder within her holds, slowly heating the volatile chemicals until they reached a critical point. Others wondered whether the towing operation itself had caused unseen damage to her cargo, breaking containers or spilling materials into dangerous contact. There were even whispers of sabotage, though no evidence was ever found to support the theory. What made the question so persistent was the sheer amount of time between the two blasts, nearly 15 hours, long enough for intervention to seem possible, yet short enough to make the disaster feel inevitable. Survivor accounts from the harbour added to the mystery. Crewmen who had been aboard during the towing insisted they had checked the holds and found no visible flames or dangerous heat, only smoke lingering from the earlier disaster. Dockside witnesses recalled seeing the ship moving steadily under tow, showing no outward signs of instability or distress. Yet something had been building deep inside her, unseen and unstoppable, until it tore the freighter apart in an instant. In the days that followed, salvage teams searched the waters around the wreck, hauling up fragments of steel that had been hurled hundreds of yards by the force of the blast. Many pieces were twisted beyond recognition, their surfaces scorched and pitted in ways that told of incredible heat and pressure. Investigators examined what little remained of the cargo, but found no definitive clue as to whether the detonation had started in one part of the hold or several at once. The ammonium nitrate had left little trace beyond a lingering acrid scent in the air and a film of yellow residue clinging to the waterline. For Texas City, the High Flyer's explosion was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a chain reaction that claimed hundreds of lives, injured thousands, and levelled large sections of the port. Yet for maritime historians, it stood apart as a separate and equally troubling event, one in which all the known dangers had been identified and steps had been taken to prevent disaster, only for disaster to come anyway. The question of whether the ship could have been saved remains as unsettled now as it was in the spring of 1947. Time has passed, yet the enigma remains stubbornly intact. Official records detail the sequence of events with clinical precision, but they cannot explain the slow and silent countdown that must have been ticking away in the High Flyer's darkened holds. Fire science points to a range of possibilities, each plausible yet unprovable without the physical evidence that the sea destroyed. What lingers in the accounts of those who were there is the image of a ship that seemed to have escaped one of the worst harbour explosions in history, only to meet the same fate hours later, with no clear cause. The waters off Texas City have long since returned to their usual rhythms, tides moving over the place where the High Flyer's remains were scattered. But for those who know the story, the silence there carries a weight, as if the unanswered questions are still drifting just beneath the surface. No memorial or investigation has ever filled the gaps in the narrative, and perhaps none ever will. The sea holds what it chooses to keep, and in the case of the High Flyer, it has chosen to keep it secret. The curse of the whistling ship SS Baichimo's endless drift. A pale Arctic sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the drifting pack ice, when hunters in the Canadian north first saw her. The SS Baichimo lay trapped in the frozen sea, her hull gripped by thick sheets of ice and her decks silent under a dusting of snow. To those who knew these waters, it was a strange sight to find a steel cargo ship so far from open channels in the dead of winter, and stranger still to see no movement on board. Her smokestack stood cold, her lifeboat still in place, as if her crew had simply stepped below deck and never returned. In the stillness, some swore they heard a faint whistling sound, high and hollow, carried on the wind from somewhere deep within the ship's empty frame. The Baichimo's journey had begun years earlier, built in Sweden in 1914 and later operated by the Hudson's Bay Company as a trading vessel along the remote northern coast of Canada. She was a lifeline for isolated settlements, hauling furs, supplies and goods through waters that tested even the most experienced captains. In October of 1931, she became locked in sea ice near Barrow, Alaska, after completing her trading season. The crew, facing the long, merciless Arctic winter, set up camp on the ice and waited for a chance to free her. For weeks they endured temperatures that froze breath in midair and winds that rattled the walls of their makeshift shelters. Then, in early November, a violent blizzard swept across the camp, blinding snow and roaring gusts forcing the men to take cover for 2 full days. When the storm finally passed, the Baichimo was gone. She had broken free of the ice and vanished into the grey distance without a trace. Assuming she had sunk, most of the crew arranged for transport home. But a week later, reports came from Inuit hunters who had spotted her drifting not far from where she'd been trapped. A salvage party managed to reach her, retrieving what cargo they could before abandoning her once more to the shifting ice. They believed she would soon be claimed by the sea. That belief proved to be premature. Over the following decades, the Baichimo was sighted again and again, always drifting, always deserted. In 1932 she appeared off the coast of Nome, her hull weathered but intact, gliding silently past fishing boats before vanishing into fog. In 1933 she was seen hundreds of miles from that spot, moving steadily with the current as if following some hidden map known only to her. Attempts to board and tow her to port often ended in frustration, with ice closing in or sudden storms forcing would-be salvors to turn back. Each time she escaped, the sightings became stranger, and the legend of the whistling ship began to take root. The whistling itself was not something every witness heard, but those who did described it in unsettling detail. Some likened it to the sound of wind threading through narrow pipes, a long, wavering tone that rose and fell as if in response to the movement of the waves. Others claimed it was almost melodic, like the distant notes of a flute. Theories range from damage to her ventilation shafts to the resonance of ice rubbing against her hull, yet the reports were often too consistent and too specific to be dismissed outright. In the stillness of Arctic nights, when the air was so clear that sound carried for miles, the whistling seemed to drift across the water before the ghostly outline of the ship emerged from the mist. By the 1940s, the Bachimo had become a maritime phantom, recognised by sailors and hunters who had never seen her up close, but knew her silhouette instantly. She was always moving, always just out of reach, like a mirage brought to life by the play of ice and current. Stories circulated of crews who had boarded her, finding the cabins stripped of supplies and the logbooks missing, as if someone, or something, had been there before them. In one account, a group of traders stayed aboard for 2 nights during a sudden freeze, claiming they heard the whistling constantly, echoing through the steel corridors and seeming to shift from one end of the ship to the other without any wind to cause it. They left with the uneasy feeling that they had been watched the entire time. What made her endless drift so difficult to explain was her sheer resilience. Unlike many ships abandoned in the Arctic, she did not break apart quickly under the strain of shifting ice. Her steel plates held firm and her seams did not split, allowing her to survive winter after winter in a place where wooden vessels could be crushed in hours. The currents carried her across vast stretches of the Beaufort and Chukchi seas, sometimes bringing her within sight of land, only for her to vanish again into the labyrinth of ice floes. It was as if she resisted every effort to end her story, lingering far beyond the lifespan of an ordinary freighter. In 1969, nearly 40 years after her abandonment, a final confirmed sighting placed the Bachimo frozen in the ice near Point Barrow once again. She was weathered and rust-streaked, her superstructure showing the wear of decades at sea without maintenance, but she remained upright and largely intact. Efforts to reach her were delayed by worsening weather, and when conditions cleared, she had disappeared for the last time. Whether she finally sank beneath the ice or continued her wandering in the far north is still unknown. No wreck has ever been found. The legend of the whistling ship has outlasted the vessel itself. In coastal villages and among Arctic sailors, her name is spoken with a mix of admiration and unease. Some say she's cursed, doomed to wander until the sea claims her entirely. Others believe she is simply one of the ocean's stubborn survivors, carried endlessly by wind and current with no destination but the horizon. The whistling, they say, is the voice of the ship herself, a restless song carried on the cold breath of the Arctic, calling out across the ice to no one in particular. Even now, when satellite mapping has made the world's oceans seem smaller and less mysterious, the Bachimo's fate remains an open question. Somewhere beneath the shifting floes and frigid waters, she may rest in silence, or perhaps she still moves with the currents, unseen but not forgotten. For those who sail the far north, the possibility lingers that one foggy morning her shape will emerge once again from the ice, the faint whistle rising on the wind, a reminder that some ships are never truly lost. The silent storm of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Snow-laden clouds pressed low over Lake Superior as a steel giant carved its way through the dark water, her bow rising and falling against the growing waves. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was no stranger to this route, having carried thousands of tons of iron ore across the Great Lakes since her launch in 1958. But on November 10th, 1975, the mood aboard was far from routine. Weather reports warned of a storm building to the west, and the air carried the raw metallic scent that often comes before a heavy squall. She was 729 feet of steel and power, yet the lake was known to have little regard for size or experience. The day had started with cold but manageable winds, and Captain Ernest McSorley guided the Fitzgerald alongside another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, as both made their way toward the shelter of Whitefish Bay. By afternoon, conditions began to shift, the wind rising sharply and snow cutting visibility down to a blur of white. Ice formed quickly along railings and hatches, and the ship's bow punched through steepening waves with a rhythm that grew heavier by the hour. Still, there was no sign of panic, only the measured urgency of a crew well aware of the lake's mood swings. In the early evening, the storm reached its peak. Gale-force winds roared over the water, pushing waves as high as 25 feet. Radio exchanges between McSorley and the Anderson described topside damage, including the loss of railings and a broken vent cover. Yet the captain's voice remained steady, reporting that they were holding their own and expecting to reach the safety of the bay later that night. Around 7:10 p.m, McSorley made his final known transmission telling the Anderson, "We are holding our own." Less than 10 minutes later, the Fitzgerald vanished from radar. No distress signal had been sent. There were no flares, no radio calls, no last-minute warning, only the sudden disappearance of a vessel and all 29 men aboard. The Anderson pressed on through the storm, making repeated calls into the empty air, but no voice answered. When the winds eased the following day, search aircraft and rescue boats scoured the area where the Fitzgerald had last been seen. What they found were small patches of oil, pieces of debris, and lifeboats that had either been torn apart or were still secured shut, suggesting no time had been given to launch them. Search teams also interviewed other ships in the area that night, gathering fragmented accounts of lights seen through the snow and sudden gaps of silence on the radio. The Anderson's crew recalled watching the Fitzgerald vanish into a wall of snow moments before their radar screen went blank. A disappearance so abrupt they thought it must be a malfunction. Pilots flying over the search zone later reported streaks of reddish foam on the surface, possibly from cargo dust mixing with the waves. Each clue hinted at a violent rapid end, but none could form a complete picture of what had happened. Theories about what happened in those silent minutes began to multiply almost immediately. Some believed the ship had taken on water through damaged hatches, flooding her holds until she could no longer stay afloat. Others suggested she may have struck an uncharted shoal, tearing her hull open in an instant. There were even whispers of structural failure, the enormous stress of the storm snapping her steel in two beneath the surface. None of these could be confirmed with certainty, and each carried its own set of questions that resisted neat answers. When divers reached the wreck in the months that followed, they found the Fitzgerald resting in two main sections on the lake bed, about 530 feet down. The bow lay upright, its forward deck largely intact, while the stern sat twisted and partially collapsed some distance away. The separation suggested a catastrophic break, but whether it happened above water or as she sank remained unclear. The cargo of taconite pellets was still inside, scattered across the bottom in a wide arc that marked her final descent. The lake's icy depths had preserved much of the scene, but not the full story. During later dives, remotely operated cameras revealed signs that at least one of the ship's hatch covers may have been partially unsecured, its edges warped in a way that suggested force from within. Investigators debated whether this indicated flooding from heavy seas or structural failure under extreme stress. Sediment stirred up around the wreck hinted at strong undercurrents on the lake bed, currents that might have shifted debris or hidden further evidence. Some divers described the eerie clarity of the water at that depth, where the Fitzgerald's name was still faintly visible on her bow, as if waiting for someone to read her story. The Edmund Fitzgerald's sinking carried a weight beyond its mystery. These were not anonymous sailors lost in some far ocean, but men with homes and families in towns scattered along the Great Lakes. Their absence left a silence felt in every port they had ever docked at, and in the decades since, the loss has become a kind of shared wound among those who make their living on the water. Annual memorial services are still held, the tolling of a ship's bell marking each crewman by name, a ritual that ensures their story is never reduced to just a puzzle of steel and weather. For mariners, the unanswered questions remain more than an academic exercise. The Fitzgerald's fate has influenced safety regulations, cargo loading procedures, and storm warning protocols. Yet even with these changes, the feeling persists that some elements of her final moments may never be understood, sealed away in the cold black depths of the lake. Lake Superior's surface can be smooth and glass-like one day, then rise into walls of water the next, and the storm of November 1975 still stands as one of her most dangerous moods. Those who sail the Great Lakes speak of the Fitzgerald with a certain kind of reverence, as if the ship herself had taken on a life beyond her steel frame. On some nights when the wind howls across the water, they say the sound seems to carry a rhythm, an echo of steel hull meeting wave, a memory of a final voyage that ended too soon. And just as the storm left no survivors to speak for her, the lake has kept her truth buried beneath its restless surface, where the silent storm still waits unanswered. The enigmatic fate of the USS Thresher. Cold salt water closed over the steel hull of the USS Thresher as it left Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in April 1963. The crew unaware that the dive they were about to make would be its last. The submarine, pride of the US Navy's nuclear fleet, was built to go deeper and move faster than anything before it, a machine meant to outmatch the uncertainties of the ocean. Yet even as it slipped beneath the surface for a routine deep diving test, the vast silent pressure of the Atlantic began to feel less like a challenge and more like a threat waiting to reveal itself. Far below the surface, the Thresher moved into the cold darkness, its sonar pulses echoing off unseen walls of water. The submarine had undergone months of upgrades and inspections, but small problems had been noted: valves, piping, and welds that might not hold against the crushing force of depth. In theory, there were systems in place to stop a chain reaction of disaster, but theory and reality do not always meet in the deep. As the crew performed their descent, they were trailed by the USS Skylark, a surface vessel meant to serve as the eyes and ears above, its own crew listening for every sound from below. Somewhere beyond the 1,000 foot mark, the first sign of trouble was faint, almost easy to dismiss, a garbled transmission from the Thresher reporting what sounded like minor difficulties. Notably, analysis of the transmission revealed an unusual mechanical noise in the background, a sound never fully explained but thought to be linked to critical system failure. The ocean has a way of swallowing words, and the static-filled voice over the radio carried both urgency and restraint, as though someone was trying to keep calm while the situation turned. Minutes later, another message came through, broken and distorted, mentioning a problem with the ballast system. Without the ability to blow water from its tanks and rise quickly, the submarine was trapped in the pull of its own depth. On the Skylark, crew members strained to make sense of the fragments they heard through the speaker. Some say there was the sound of rushing water in the background, a chilling noise when you know the pressure outside is enough to crush steel like paper. Then came silence. No further words, no sign of movement, just the steady hum of the sea itself. Those on the surface sent repeated calls, hoping for a reply, but the deep answered only with emptiness. For nearly an hour they continued to listen, unwilling to accept that the Thresher was gone. When the Navy announced the loss, the numbers alone told the scale of the disaster. 129 lives ended in a place where recovery was nearly impossible. Months later, cameras sent to the ocean floor found scattered pieces of the submarine lying in a debris field under 8,400 feet of water. Sections of the pressure hull were shattered outward, a sign that the force of the implosion had been instantaneous. It would have happened faster than the human mind could register, faster than the crew could react. In the quiet of the deep, the Thresher had simply ceased to be whole. The official investigation pointed to a failure in the piping that carried seawater into the engine room, possibly due to poor welds that had not been fully tested for deep-sea pressure. When that line burst, it may have flooded critical systems and caused the nuclear reactor to shut down. Without power, the submarine could not control its depth, and without the ability to blow its ballast tanks effectively, another flaw in the system, the Thresher would have been helpless to stop its descent. Each failure fed the next, until there was no more time left to fix anything. This loss would become the catalyst for SubSafe, a program designed to ensure every submarine that follows has redundant safety systems and more rigorous inspections. It meant no vessel would leave port without being tested far beyond what was once considered acceptable. Despite these measures, some divers and researchers have reported strange anomalies in the vicinity of the wreck, including unexplained sonar echoes and sudden electronic disruptions during exploratory missions. The name of the Thresher became both a caution and a promise, a reminder carved into every decision about submarine design. Yet for the families who waited for years without even the chance to recover remains, safety programs could never replace the voices they had lost. The wreckage of the USS Thresher still lies in place, scattered over the seabed like a memory that time has left untouched. The nuclear reactor, long since inert, sits among the debris, watched over by nothing but the shifting currents and the creatures that live in darkness. No one speaks of raising it. The depth is too great, the risks too high. What remains is visited only by unmanned vehicles and the rare camera. each pass revealing that the cold Atlantic keeps its dead with a kind of silent finality. For those who have studied the loss, there is a belief that the Thresher's fate was not just mechanical, but a stark reminder of how the ocean can turn on even the most advanced creations of human engineering. Depth does not forgive, and pressure does not yield. Somewhere in those last moments, amid failing systems and the realization that the surface was out of reach, the crew would have known what was coming. And then, in less than a heartbeat, the sea took everything. Among naval tragedies, the USS Thresher's fate is especially haunting, not due to a fierce battle or raging storm, but because it slipped away in silence, sinking slowly into a world where survival was impossible. In the end, the mystery lies not in what caused the disaster, for much of that has been understood, but in imagining the final thoughts of those who vanished into the silence of the deep, leaving only fragments and questions that the ocean will never answer. The phantom crew of the SV Jenny. When the whaling ship Hope sighted the small schooner drifting among the Antarctic ice in 1840, its crew expected to find desperate sailors in need of rescue, but the silence that hung over the vessel was deeper and heavier than the icy air around it. Drawing closer, they saw that the ship's rigging was stiff with frost, her sails frozen solid in a mid-turn as if caught in time. The name painted across her stern read SV Jenny, a vessel no one on board the Hope had heard of before that day. From the moment their boots hit the frost-crusted deck, it was clear this was no ordinary encounter. Inside, the ship told a story that no one would ever fully understand. The crew's quarters were in perfect order, each bunk neatly made, each personal belonging in place, yet every man was frozen where he sat or stood, locked in eerie stillness. In the captain's cabin, a logbook rested on the desk. Its last entry dated May 17, 1823, 17 years before the Jenny was found, recording their position as trapped in ice and declaring, "No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive." The handwriting ended abruptly, mid-line, as though the man had intended to write more but never had the chance. The captain himself sat at the desk, head bowed, still clutching a pen in his gloved hand. The conditions inside the SV Jenny made little sense to those who discovered her. The cold was intense, but not enough to explain how everybody remained so perfectly preserved after nearly 2 decades, their expressions fixed in calm or mild concentration rather than fear. Even the ship's provisions, barrels of salted meat, sacks of flour, were untouched and intact, as though sealed only months ago. More unsettling still was the fact that the schooner was hundreds of miles from any known whaling or sealing route, drifting in waters that few ships had ever dared to enter. How she ended up there, and how her crew died without apparent struggle, was a question that no one could answer. Sailors spoke in low voices about the possibility that the Jenny had been caught in the ice for years, moving only when the floes shifted enough to release her. Some believed the crew had succumbed to starvation or exposure during that first long winter, their ship carried slowly by the currents until it emerged again into open water. Yet others whispered that there was something unnatural about the way the vessel had remained hidden for so long, unseen by any passing ship until the moment the Hope stumbled upon it. The frozen bodies, untouched supplies, and absence of any sign of decay only deepened those suspicions. When the Hope's captain attempted to bring the Jenny back, the effort was abandoned after the ice began to close in again with alarming speed. Fearing they might share the schooner's fate, he ordered his men to retrieve only the logbook and a few small personal items before retreating. They left her there among the shifting floes, slowly vanishing from sight as the sea swallowed her once more. In the years that followed, the Jenny became a name passed between sailors in dockside taverns and remote whaling stations, always with a tone that mixed fascination with dread. From time to time, stories emerged claiming the schooner had been seen again, but none were ever proven true. One whaler claimed to have seen her masts protruding from the pack ice in 1860, the same weathered timbers still locked in place. Another story told of a sealing crew who found her adrift again in the late 19th century, though they turned away without boarding. In each account, the Jenny seemed more like a phantom than a vessel, appearing without warning and vanishing just as suddenly, never allowing more than a fleeting glimpse. Piecing together the Jenny's journey before she was caught in the ice is no simpler task. Her logbook revealed only fragments of her route, with gaps of weeks or months between entries that hinted at storms, illness, or failed hunts. There were no letters or cargo manifests to explain where she'd been bound or why she was so far south. Maritime records of the period contain no listing for a schooner by that name sailing from any major port, leading some to speculate she had been operating in secrecy, perhaps involved in unregistered sealing runs or smuggling. Others think she may have been a private expedition, her crew chasing fortune in the uncharted southern seas. In the decades since, historians and researchers have tried to determine whether the story of the Jenny is fact or legend, combing through archives for proof of her existence. While some dismiss the account as a sailor's tale embellished over the years, others point out that the Hope and her captain were real, and their recorded voyage matches the time and location given in the story. The recovered logbook, however, has long since disappeared from public record, its last known mention buried in a maritime journal from the late 19th century. Without it, the physical evidence for the schooner's fate rests entirely on hearsay and scattered testimony. Yet the vision of a vessel entombed in ice for 17 years, with her crew frozen in place, refuses to fade from fascination. Modern expeditions into Antarctic waters have occasionally searched for wrecks matching her description, but none have turned up anything definitive. The shifting ice, the crushing pressure of the floes, and the sheer size of the Southern Ocean make it nearly impossible to know where to begin. And perhaps, for those who hear her story, the Jenny's absence is part of the allure. She's not just a ship, but a reminder of how quickly the sea can erase even the strongest human traces. If the SV Jenny still drifts somewhere beneath the Antarctic ice, she would be one of the best preserved time capsules in maritime history. Aboard her would remain the silent evidence of a voyage that pushed beyond the limits of endurance, leaving its crew forever trapped between one frozen horizon and the next. Until she is found, if she ever is, her story will remain locked in that final log entry, a single line scratched in ink by a dying man while the wind howled outside his cabin. And like the endless southern winter, the truth behind it may never fully thaw. The deadly silence surrounding the MV Cormoran. The MV Cormoran was not the kind of ship that turned heads in every port, yet it carried a reputation that drifted quietly among sailors who had crossed paths with her. She was a German auxiliary cruiser, disguised in merchant colours, built for the subtle art of deception at sea. Her job was not to be seen until it was too late. In the early 1940s, she slipped through the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific under false flags, hunting Allied shipping while blending in with the crowded maritime routes. No one on board could have predicted that her final moments would vanish into a cloud of silence and conflicting reports, leaving historians chasing shadows for decades. Accounts of her last known mission focus on a single day in November 1941, when the Cormoran encountered HMAS Sydney off the coast of Western Australia. It was the kind of meeting that should have been an exchange of recognition signals and a parting of ways, but what followed instead was an explosion of gunfire and chaos. Survivors from the Cormoran would later claim that the Australian cruiser approached too close, allowing the disguised German ship to reveal her true armament and open fire at point-blank range. For less than half an hour, the sea between them boiled with shell splashes, shrapnel, and smoke thick enough to blot out the sun. When the noise faded, both ships were mortally wounded, and the Cormoran's crew abandoned their burning vessel as night began to fall. The silence that followed the battle was not just the quiet of an empty horizon, it was the sound of a story being sealed away. The HMAS Sydney never returned to port, and there were no Australian survivors to tell their side of what happened. The only voices left belonged to the men of the Cormoran, who drifted in lifeboats until they were picked up by Australian authorities. From them came the official version of events, a tale that portrayed the German crew as acting only in self-defence. Yet the inconsistencies in their statements soon began to draw suspicion. Some details shifted from one interview to another, small contradictions that hinted at deeper truths that may have been buried deliberately. Speculation began almost immediately. The most common theory suggested that the Cormoran had lured the Sydney in closer, with false signals before delivering a fatal blow that gave the Australians no time to respond effectively. Others went further, claiming that some part of the battle had been concealed entirely, that perhaps there had been an attempt to board the Sydney, or that the damage was so catastrophic it was better left unspoken. The lack of physical evidence for decades only made the mystery grow. The wrecks of both ships lay undiscovered under hundreds of meters of water, leaving nothing but wartime interrogations and second-hand memories to piece together what truly happened. When the Cormoran went down, she took with her not just the physical proof of the engagement, but also the possibility of a neutral account. Official reports focused on the known facts, the location, the time, the identities of the vessels, yet they avoided pressing too hard on the areas where the Cormoran survivors seemed evasive. It was wartime, and in the eyes of many, the priority was to move forward rather than pick apart a tragedy. But the families of the Sydney's crew, along with historians and naval investigators, found it impossible to let go. The idea that the final hours of more than 600 men could be wrapped in unanswered questions was too much to accept. When the wrecks were finally located in 2008, lying just over 12 nautical miles apart, the seabed offered a silent testimony. The Sydney was heavily damaged, her bow separated from the rest of the hull, and signs of intense shelling were visible along her sides. The Cormoran was scorched and broken, but the pattern of the damage seemed to match the German accounts. Even so, the underwater images did not speak to the finer details, whether the Sydney had indeed been caught off guard, whether there had been a moment of surrender ignored, or whether some unrecorded act of desperation had taken place. The ocean had kept those truths locked away. Among those who have studied the incident, there is a sense that the official story serves as a convenient compromise between conflicting realities. The Germans emerged as victors of a Pyrrhic engagement, losing their ship but sinking an enemy cruiser, while the Australians were left with a loss so absolute that only one perspective survived to be told. This imbalance has fueled endless debates in naval history circles, where even small discrepancies in shell trajectories or ship positioning become the subject of lengthy analysis. Each theory draws on the same limited evidence, yet none can claim to hold the definitive truth. For the survivors of the Cormoran, life after the battle meant years in prisoner of war camps in Australia. Their interrogations continued, and while some grew weary and spoke more freely, others held firm to the original version of events. Over time, the gaps between their stories and the wreckage findings narrowed but never closed entirely. It is in these spaces, in the few seconds between recognition and open fire, in the unanswered question of why the Sydney never sent a distress call, that the weight of the mystery lies. These moments remain untouched, preserved in silence as effectively as any classified file. In the shadow of time, the clash between the MV Cormoran and HMS Sydney stands out not only for its sudden and brutal violence, but for the silence that followed, a silence that still shapes how it is remembered. The ocean floor holds the ships, but the human story rests in fragments shaped by memory, bias, and the need for closure. The deadly silence that followed the gunfire has outlived every man who witnessed it, and as the decades pass, it becomes harder to imagine that the missing pieces will ever be found. What remains is an unfinished chapter, one that reminds us that sometimes the sea does not return what it has taken, not even the truth. The silent horror of the ghost ship SS Kamloops. Beneath the frigid waters of Lake Superior lies a ship that seems frozen not only in time, but in a haunting tableau that defies explanation. The SS Kamloops was a steel-hulled freighter, built to endure the demanding trade routes of the Great Lakes, yet in the winter of 1927, it vanished without a trace during a routine voyage. Weeks passed with no sign of the vessel or her crew, and when wreckage finally surfaced, it was far from where anyone expected, carried by powerful currents to the rugged shores of Isle Royale. Even then, the ship herself remained hidden, as if the lake had decided to keep her secret a little longer. Divers who eventually reached the wreck decades later described a scene so unsettling that it would follow them long after they left the water. Resting more than 260 feet below the surface, the Kamloops sits eerily intact, her cargo still stacked neatly in the holds, as if she had only just gone down. A scattering of personal effects, from leather gloves to handwritten letters, lay where they had fallen, shielded from decay as if someone had placed them there yesterday. The water at that depth is so cold it preserves everything it claims, and among the preserved remains were the crew members themselves, their features frozen in a state of uncanny lifelikeness. The silence in that sunless place was said to press down on divers until they felt like unwelcome visitors in a graveyard. What makes the Kamloops especially disturbing is not just the fact that she went down, but how little is understood about her final hours. The last confirmed sighting was by the steamer Algoma Central, which reported heavy snow squalls and worsening ice forming on deck. After that, she disappeared into the storm, leaving no distress calls, no flare, no message. The official assumption was that ice built up so heavily she became unstable and rolled, but the ship's relatively good condition on the lakebed suggests she did not break apart or capsize violently, raising the question of whether something else forced her under. Some of the stories told by the first divers to visit her border on the supernatural. One tale in particular describes a lone crewman, perfectly preserved in his work clothes, standing upright within the engine room, leaning gently with the current as if still tending to his duties. Over time, this figure became known among diving circles as Grandpa, a silent guardian of the Kamloops who seemed almost to watch over the wreck. More than one diver swore that Grandpa had shifted position between visits, an impossible claim dismissed by skeptics but repeated often enough to give pause. The preservation of the ship and her crew is a direct result of Lake Superior's cold, oxygen-poor depths, yet the effect creates a chilling sense of timelessness. It is as if the Kamloops never truly sank, but instead slipped into a parallel stillness beneath the waves, where moments never decay. The items left behind, shoes still lined neatly in cabins, an unopened jar of candy, clothing folded in drawers, seem to whisper of a life interrupted, their mundane nature making the loss all the more poignant. These weren't relics of war or disaster at sea. They were the daily belongings of people who had no reason to expect death so soon. When the wreck was finally located in 1977 by a group of local divers, the discovery made headlines across the region, yet the more details emerged, the more questions surfaced. No logbook was ever recovered, and without it, the events of the last day remain guesswork. Some theories suggest the ship may have been caught in a rare convergence of ice, wind and wave patterns that immobilized her in open water, sealing her fate before she could seek shelter. One possibility is that some vital failure left her adrift, with the storm delivering the final blow. Curiously, several sealed cargo crates were found with their lids removed, their contents undisturbed but neatly arranged, a detail investigators could never explain. Whatever the cause, the absence of human testimony leaves only the mute evidence of the wreck itself. For those who have descended to her resting place, the memory is almost always described in terms of weight. The weight of the water above, the weight of the silence, and the weight of standing in the presence of lives that never had a chance to explain their own ending. Some divers come away believing that the Kamloops carries a presence with her, a lingering echo of the day she disappeared. It is not an overt haunting with movement or sound, but rather a profound feeling that you are being observed, that you're trespassing in a moment not meant for the living. Since her discovery, the Kamloops has been treated as a place few will ever reach, shielded by the perilous depths of Lake Superior and by the quiet reverence owed to those still aboard. While underwater photography has brought the image of her ghostly interiors to the public, there is still much about her that is known only to the few who have been there in person. The lake keeps its secrets well, and even in an age where satellite mapping and sonar scanning can reveal nearly anything, the intimate details of that winter tragedy remain locked away. For all the years she's rested beneath the waves, the SS Kamloops has never truly surrendered her final chapter. Every time a diver returns to her, there is the possibility of noticing something that wasn't there before, or of being confronted by the quiet stare of a face untouched by time. And while the cause of her sinking may one day be pieced together from data and analysis, the emotional shadow she casts is not so easily explained. In that deep, dark chamber where she rests, there is a sense that the past is not past at all. It simply waits, patient and unchanging for whoever dares to visit. The last transmission of the MV Alta. Waves rolled endlessly beneath a sky that seemed locked in an unbroken sheet of grey when the MV Alta first began to draw the attention of maritime authorities, her aging bulk carrier frame carrying a history that was already complex long before her final, fateful disappearance from contact. She had been built in 1976 and changed hands multiple times over the decades, passing between owners like a ship unable to find a permanent home, her service marked by both long stretches of obscurity and occasional brushes with notoriety. The ship's last known voyage began in late 2018, and from the start there were warning signs that whatever lay ahead would be far from routine. From accounts pieced together later, The Alta had been bound for Haiti from Greece when her troubles began. The voyage interrupted by mechanical failure in the mid-Atlantic that left her drifting helplessly. The 10 crew members aboard faced a daunting wait as they attempted to radio for help, and their distress calls eventually reached the ears of the US Coast Guard. By the time a rescue was arranged in October of that year, they had been stranded for weeks, surviving on dwindling supplies in the hope that someone would reach them before the ship became uninhabitable. The Coast Guard ultimately evacuated the crew, leaving the Alta abandoned and adrift, a massive steel ghost in one of the most remote stretches of ocean. Drifting ships have a way of disappearing from public view, and for months the Alta's location was unknown to anyone outside of a few scattered sightings by passing vessels. Reports surfaced of her being seen near Bermuda, then perhaps caught in the pull of the Gulf Stream, but none of these sightings were confirmed. Maritime experts noted that without a crew to tend to her, the ship's condition would only deteriorate, making her eventual recovery difficult and dangerous. Yet the Alta did not sink into the depths like so many other derelicts. Instead, she seemed to wander on, a silent silhouette moving at the mercy of currents and storms. When a massive Atlantic storm struck in late 2019, some speculated that the Alta would finally meet her end. The tempest force was enough to scatter debris from other ships for hundreds of miles, and if the Alta was caught in it, her weakened hull and decades-old structure would have struggled to withstand the impact. Yet no wreckage was reported, and for months after the storm subsided, the ocean kept her secrets. It was as though she'd slipped into another layer of existence, neither fully gone nor entirely present, a drifting reminder of how vast and unknowable the sea can be. It was February 2020 when the mystery reappeared dramatically, far from where anyone had last expected her. After a fierce winter storm battered the southern coast of Ireland, locals near Ballycotton spotted a massive rust-streaked bulk carrier grounded on the rocky shoreline. The ship's name, still faintly visible on her corroded hull, confirmed the impossible. This was the MV Alta, intact enough to be recognised but eerily lifeless. There was no sign of crew, no evidence of recent habitation, and no clear indication of how she had travelled thousands of miles from the mid-Atlantic to the Irish coast without being intercepted. Authorities arrived quickly to inspect the grounded vessel, and what they found only deepened the strangeness. Inside, the ship was stripped bare of anything valuable, her rooms empty except for a few scattered personal items that hinted at her last human occupants, but offered no clear answers. Maritime investigators noted that the lack of damage suggested she had not been through the worst of storms in the months before her arrival, yet the lack of working equipment and her rusted, weathered condition confirmed she had been adrift for well over a year. Salvage crews faced an immediate challenge. The Alta was lodged on a rocky outcrop in a spot notorious for rough seas, and the cost of removing her was estimated in the millions. For the Irish authorities, the vessel was not only a logistical problem but also an environmental one. Without intervention, her fuel and other hazardous materials risked leaking into the surrounding waters, threatening local wildlife and fishing grounds. Yet the process of dismantling or moving such a massive derelict proved more complicated than anyone had anticipated, and weeks stretched into months as the Alta remained perched in place, like an enormous monument to maritime uncertainty. Even as engineers debated the best way to deal with her, the public fascination grew. Stories circulated about the ship's long journey, with theories ranging from her being towed and abandoned again, to her drifting entirely under the power of wind and current across the Atlantic. Some maritime historians noted that such a voyage was not impossible, but would require a remarkable alignment of conditions, especially for a vessel in such poor repair. Others leaned toward the idea that she may have been sighted more times than the record shows, her presence simply unreported in certain regions where shipping lanes were sparse. As the months wore on, the Alta began to deteriorate more rapidly under the constant battering of Irish weather. Her hull, already weakened from years at sea without maintenance, developed fractures, and there were growing fears that she would break apart during a major storm. Environmental agencies worked alongside salvage teams to remove hazardous substances, but the scale of the operation was immense, and every step forward seemed to be met with another setback. The ship had become both a physical and symbolic fixture, a reminder of how something abandoned can still command attention simply by enduring. From a stranded vessel in the mid-Atlantic to a spectral appearance on Ireland's rugged coast, The journey of the MV Alta remains one of the strangest puzzles in recent maritime history. Satellite tracking, shipping logs, and weather reports offer fragments of explanation but never a complete picture of her route. The most unsettling part of the mystery is that her last confirmed transmission came not long after her crew was rescued in 2018, leaving everything that happened afterwards shrouded in silence. That silence still hangs over her rusting frame, a weight as heavy as the ocean itself, carrying the unanswered question of how a ship can cross such an expanse unseen and unheard until it runs aground in full view of the world. The lost signals of the CAS-2. It began as a short voyage, meant to be nothing more than a relaxed sailing trip along the coast of Queensland, Australia, yet the CAS-2 would soon become a fixture in maritime mystery. The vessel, a modest 12-metre catamaran, left Airlie Beach on April 15, 2007, crewed by 3 middle-aged men who were close friends. Weather reports were calm, the route was familiar, and there was nothing to suggest danger on the horizon. For those who knew them, it was simply a chance for the men to enjoy the sea, to share stories, and to take in the stillness of the ocean. But when the CAS-2 was found days later drifting aimlessly near the Great Barrier Reef, that picture of quiet leisure would be replaced by questions that refused to fade. The yacht was first spotted by a helicopter from the Coast Guard, gently rocking on the waves, its sails still neatly set and its engines running. At first glance, it appeared to be in good order, almost too good for a vessel in distress. When authorities boarded, the eerie reality became clear. The CAS-2 was empty. Life jackets hung where they were supposed to, personal belongings were untouched, and even a laptop was open and running, its screen frozen mid-use. Plates of food were still on the table in the small cabin, as though the crew had just stepped away for a moment and would return any second. The scene looked less like a disaster and more like time itself had stopped, leaving the boat caught between presence and absence. Closer inspection deepened the puzzle. One of the sails had been slightly shredded, and there was evidence of minor damage to the railings, but nothing that suggested a violent encounter or severe weather. A fishing line trailed lazily in the water, as though someone had been using it only hours before, and the anchor was up, meaning the vessel had not been deliberately set adrift. The last known radio contact from the crew offered no hints of trouble. They had made no distress call, no sign that they were aware of any danger. Every sign pointed to an interruption so sudden and so absolute that the men had not even had time to grab a single life jacket before they were gone. As news of the discovery spread, speculation began to fill the silence left by the missing crew. Some theorized that an unexpected rogue wave could have swept one or more of the men overboard, prompting the others to attempt a rescue, only for all 3 to vanish in the process. Others wondered if they had encountered some kind of mechanical problem or navigational hazard that had caused them to panic. But the weather on the days in question had been mild, the sea relatively calm, and their sailing experience made them unlikely to abandon the safety of the yacht without reason. It was not lost on investigators that the boat had continued to drift under power, suggesting whatever happened was not a gradual unfolding of events but something immediate. The last recorded position of the CAS-2 was pieced together from GPS data and witness reports. The route taken was unremarkable, hugging the coastline before cutting toward the Whitsunday Islands. Nothing in the data suggested a deviation or sudden turn, which made the crew's vanishing all the more baffling. The lack of any signs of foul play also ruled out obvious criminal involvement, yet the neatness of the scene felt strangely deliberate. It was as though the men had simply stepped out of the frame, leaving the boat to carry on without them. No floating debris was found, no bodies were recovered, and the sea offered no clear explanation. Authorities conducted a thorough search over several days, deploying aircraft and ships to comb the surrounding waters. The scale of the operation reflected the urgency and confusion surrounding the incident, but it yielded nothing. With no evidence of a storm or sudden squall, the scenario of accidental man overboard remained difficult to prove. Even stranger was the fact that all 3 men disappearing simultaneously without leaving any sign of a struggle seemed improbable, yet no other narrative fit cleanly. Family members were left in limbo, forced to accept a loss without knowing the shape of the final moments. Over time, the CAS-2 joined the ranks of ghost ships whose stories resist resolution. Photographs of the tidy cabin, the neatly stowed gear, and the untouched meals became haunting images, each one a reminder that the boat had been alive with human presence only hours before it was found. The official report, released later that year, leaned toward the man overboard theory, but acknowledged that it could never be confirmed. For those closest to the men, the explanation felt insufficient, too clean for something so irreversible. The sea, in its vast indifference, had taken them, and in doing so had erased the how and why. The incident also sparked broader discussions within the maritime community about safety procedures, particularly the importance of wearing life jackets and securing lines even in calm weather. Some sailors noted that the CAS-2 might have fallen victim to what is known as the cascade effect, where a small mishap triggers a series of rapid, escalating problems that overwhelm even skilled crews. But in this case, there was no chain of events to study, only an empty vessel that did not testify. The silence of the yacht was as impenetrable as the waters beneath it. Time has moved on, yet the sight of the CAS-2 still captures the imagination of those drawn to mysteries at sea. Unlike ships lost in storms or sunk by known hazards, this catamaran was found in full working order, with everything intact except for the people. It has been compared to the Mary Celeste, another vessel abandoned without explanation more than a century earlier, though the CAS-2's disappearance happened in an era of GPS, radio communication, and modern rescue capabilities. That contrast between advanced technology and complete uncertainty only sharpens the mystery. Sailors who pass through the area sometimes speak of the CAS-2 in hushed tones, as though the yacht's fate carries a kind of quiet warning. It is a reminder that the ocean, even on its gentlest days, has depths of unpredictability that no preparation can fully guard against. To those who study maritime history, the case stands as an unresolved question mark, a moment when 3 lives simply vanished into the blue, leaving behind only a vessel that continued to move without them. The sea has never offered an answer, and perhaps it never will. The disappearance of the SV Resolven. The summer of 1884 found the SV Resolven setting out from Nova Scotia on what should have been a routine trip along the Atlantic coast, her small crew tending a modest cargo bound for St. John's, Newfoundland. The weather at departure was clear and the seas relatively calm, with no sign of the violent tempest that could transform the region into a graveyard of ships. Yet only 6 days later, another vessel came across the Resolven adrift and eerily still, her sails set and her course steady, as though she were being guided by invisible hands. The crew of the fishing schooner that spotted her expected to find someone on deck waving for assistance or signalling distress, but as they drew closer, an unsettling emptiness seemed to hang over the ship, a kind of silence that made even the seasoned sailors uneasy. When they finally boarded her, the absence of life was immediately clear. The Resolven's galley still held a kettle of tea, warm enough to suggest it had been made only hours before, and a meal sat unfinished on the mess table. Charts were neatly spread across the navigation desk, a logbook lay open with the last entry recorded the previous evening, and personal belongings were untouched in the crew's quarters. Even the ship's lifeboat was still secured in its davits, which made the total lack of crew all the more inexplicable. No sign of a struggle could be found, no overturned furniture, no broken railings, no indication of damage from the sea. The fishing crew searched every compartment and even scanned the surrounding water, but there was no trace of the men who had so recently walked her decks. As soon as the ship was in safe harbour, the guessing began. Some suggested that a sudden and thick fog could have disoriented the crew, perhaps making them believe they were in imminent danger of a collision or grounding, causing them to abandon ship in haste. Others argued that such a departure would be irrational when the vessel was still under sail and in good order, and the sea that day had been reported calm enough to make the idea even harder to accept. Whispers also grew around the possibility of foul play, piracy, mutiny, or some dark betrayal carried out in the night. But there were no signs of robbery, and nothing was missing from the cargo hold. The absence of blood or damage further weakened that explanation. Some maritime historians have looked closely at the Resolven's final logged position and weather records from that week, noting the presence of dense banks of fog and cold air sweeping off the Labrador Current. In rare cases, sudden temperature drops could trigger a phenomenon known as cold water shock, incapacitating those who entered the water before they had a chance to save themselves. If the crew had lowered a lifeboat to investigate something overboard, or to check the hull for damage and then tipped into the frigid sea, hypothermia would have set in within minutes. This, however, failed to explain why all hands were missing, since it would require every crew member to have left the vessel at once, leaving no one behind to secure or steer her. Within days of its discovery, headlines seized on the tale, casting it as a modern echo of the Mary Celeste. The press fed the public's appetite for the uncanny by embellishing certain details, describing the Resolven as drifting silently through fog-shrouded waters with her sails full but her wheel unmanned, an image that lingered in readers' minds long after the official inquiries had ended. While maritime authorities conducted interviews with nearby fishing crews and coastal watchers, no one reported seeing the Resolven's crew after she departed from Nova Scotia. The ocean had simply erased them. Away from the paperwork and reports, sailors spoke of unusual lights seen in the same waters around the time the Resolven disappeared. These glows, sometimes pale blue and sometimes fiery red, were said to hover above the water's surface before vanishing into the mist. Old seafarers often linked such sightings to superstition, believing they were omens of disaster or the restless spirits of drowned sailors. While such claims had no place in formal reports, they became part of the story's shadow, adding to the sense that the fate of the Resolven was not merely a matter of bad luck or poor seamanship, but something far more elusive. With time and new tools, maritime researchers returned to the case, armed with modern science and refined models of ocean currents, yet the mystery refused to yield. One compelling suggestion involved the possibility of toxic gases seeping up from the cargo or from the seabed below. In confined spaces like a ship's hold, certain gases could cause sudden unconsciousness or disorientation, and if the crew had been overcome while on deck or attempting to ventilate the ship, they might have collapsed or stumbled into the sea without time to react. Still, no such gases were recorded as part of the Resolven's cargo manifest, and this theory remained speculative. By the time the ship was inspected and officially logged as recovered, the trail of evidence was already fading. Without witnesses, and with the crew's families left only with grief and unanswered questions, the SV Resolven passed into the long list of maritime enigmas where conjecture often outpaces fact. The vessel herself did not carry the same tragic infamy as some lost liners or warships, but amongst sailors, her name carried a quiet weight. She had been found adrift in perfect condition, her journey interrupted not by storm or battle, but by something unseen that had taken her crew in an instant and left nothing behind. In maritime history, it is remembered less for what was found and more for the void that still surrounds it. The Resolven's silent decks, the abandoned meal, the logbook that stops mid-voyage, all these pieces combine to create a picture that is almost too still, too preserved, as if frozen in time at the very moment her human presence vanished. It is a reminder that the sea, for all its beauty and predictability in charts and schedules, still holds depths where logic falters and human lives can be erased without warning. And for those who study or sail the North Atlantic, the image of the SV Resolven moving quietly under a soft wind, with no one at her helm, continues to be a warning that some answers will always drift just out of reach, carried away by the same waters that once bore her toward her destination, only to deliver her into history as one more ghost ship without a voice to tell her story.